Is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. May the odds be ever in your favor. It's The Hunger Games, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books, and once a year we talk about a series of books that were turned into movies during our summer series. And this is the first episode of our 2021 summer series where we are discussing The Hunger Games, specifically the first one, which is called The Hunger Games, and the whole trilogy is also called The Hunger Games Trilogy. But they changed names after this first one. So we're going to get into all of our stuff that we normally do for the summer series. If you're joining us and you've listened to us normally, the segments are slightly different because for the summer series, Katie and I both read the book and both watch the film. And then we kind of deep dive, break down all of the changes, what we liked, what we didn't. So it's slightly different from our normal format.
Yeah.
Slightly. It still has most of the same kind of stuff, but we won't be doing Guess Who. We won't be doing Lost in Adaptation. We won't be doing Was That in the Book? But we will be covering all of the things that would normally be in those segments, essentially. Maybe not Guess Who, I guess doesn't. We don't have an equivalent.
Yeah, we don't really talk a lot about like what the characters look like.
I mean, anyways, it's not important. The point is, it's slightly different than our normal, but if you listen to any of our summer series before, very similar to those. So we're going to get into our very first segment, which is Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
So if you haven't read or seen The Hunger Games, surprised that you would be listening, but just in case, there's usually probably at least one person that's the case for. Let's give you a quick summary of The Hunger Games. Hunger Games takes place, I don't know, they don't give a date in the future.
Not far into the future.
In the not so distant future, in the United States, there has been a climate crisis, and the country has devolved into a new nation called Panem, a new society called Panem that has risen up from sort of the remains of civilization previous. Again, that kind of fell apart due to climate change. We ultimately find out. Some stuff happened. There was a revolution at one point where the districts tried to overthrow the capital, who is like the rulers of this new nation. After that occurred, the district that led that revolution, District 13, was destroyed. And every year since then, they hold a thing called the Hunger Games, where two people from each of the other 12 districts, are brought to the capital to compete in a battle royale gladiator arena to the death until one of these kids remains from the age of the contestants are from the age of like 12 to 18 or 17, something like that. They all fight to the death until one remains, and then that person is crowned the victor of the Hunger Games, and they're like, they get to live in a mansion and are rich for the rest of their lives. And this whole thing is broadcast out to the rest of the country as a reminder of the revolution that took place, and sort of as a deterrent to keep the other districts kind of in line. They do these Hunger Games as, again, sort of like we'll get into what the purpose are and that sort of thing when we get into into the actual conversation. And our story takes place where Katniss Everdeen, our main character, her younger sister is selected for the Hunger Games from her district, but Katniss volunteers in her place, goes along with Peeta, is a boy from her district. They go to compete in the Hunger Games. introduced to a whole cast of characters while they're there. Ultimately, they do compete in the Hunger Games, and they create a relationship as part of like the act of their, because it is a big TV show essentially. Yeah. So there's a big component of the Hunger Games isn't just like the killing each other; it's the theatrics of the whole thing. And so they've created this sort of star-crossed lovers angle for Peeta and Katniss, which will become important in later stories. More important in later stories. But ultimately, they fight through the whole Hunger Games. They end up getting down to the final few, and it's determined, or they make an announcement that, there can actually be 2 winners this year as long as they're from the same district. We finally get down to Peeta and Katniss as the final 2. And then the Capitol's like, nah, we changed our mind. You got to kill each other. One of you's got to kill, only one person can win. Ultimately, they kind of game the system by threatening to kill themselves. Capitol's like, cool, you both win. Congrats. And then we wrap up sort of after the games are over, kind of discussing the fallout of this. We get hints at what's going to be coming next, that the Capitol's not happy with them, for the president specifically, but the powers that be aren't happy with them sort of manipulating the game in that way, because it's a kind of an embarrassment, that sort of thing. And that's where our first book and movie end off, is with this sort of impending threat of their lives probably aren't going to go smoothly after having won the Hunger Games, which it does tend to for most of the victors of the Hunger. I mean, as smoothly as somebody suffering from incredible PTSD's life can go. And so, yeah, that's where we end off. They win the Hunger Games, but turmoil is brewing. All right, so that is the plot of the first Hunger Games. Now, we're going to get into it. We really only have essentially 3 segments, plus a bonus surprise fun segment, right?
Yes.
Okay. Which, if you listen to our Twilight Summer series last year, you might have an idea of what that's going to be. Maybe you won't. We'll see when we get there.
I feel like everybody who listened to our Twilight series probably remembers that bonus segment.
True. So that bonus segment, we're doing a similar thing this year, but Katie's doing it. So we'll get to that later on. Spoiler, Katie's going to predict the Hunger Games. I don't know why I'm acting like it's a surprise. Katie's going to try to predict the Hunger Games series, because she has not read or seen any of these before, whereas I have read them before. So Katie's going to try to predict the Hunger Games saga, but we'll get to that after the meat of our discussion, which is our better in the book, better in the movie, and the movie nailed it. And the first one of those that we always get into is what was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
So we both had this note right off the bat that the movie opens up with these opening titles.
Yeah, like text on screen.
Text on screen, opening, title cards that explain the world of Panem.
Yeah.
And like the Hunger Games and what that all is. It's kind of like 4, title cards that kind of breeze through and give you a brief overview of what's going on here. And I much preferred the book's version of slowly doling that information out over the course of the first, quarter of the book or whatever.
Yeah.
It just felt very dumb. And it also felt really weird because we get within 10 minutes of the movie's beginning, when they get to the actual reaping, we get like a PSA that plays from
like
the
a
Capitol.
little propaganda film.
That literally covers all of that information.
Yeah. In a much more interesting,
way.
Yeah.
And this was 100% a studio note.
Yeah.
To add
It's a total like movie thing to do, is to have that text right up at the front that explains it. And it is, I think, an interesting choice, especially considering, one, like you said, that not 10 minutes later we get a little film explaining what it is, explaining the exact same thing.
Yeah.
But also they had to know that the majority of people coming to see this have read the book.
And even if you haven't read the book, the majority of people at least knew the premise. You know what I mean? Like, even people who hadn't read the book, I feel like would know, like if you hadn't read the book or anything, I feel like you would have been like, okay, yeah, they draft these kids to go fight to the death in like a gladiator thing. Like, and that's basically all you learn. I mean, they tell you a little bit extra about the potential, like the revolution that kind of started and that sort of stuff. But that was very strange. To me, it was 100% something that was clearly not in the movie. was not part of the film, not part of the director or anybody's vision, but some studio exec was like, well, I don't know what's going on. Why don't you just, we need title cards or people aren't going to get what's going on. And they're like, like in 5 minutes, we literally play a PSA that tells them what's going on. Well, why don't you, the title card that tells people what's going on in the setting? It's like, oh my God. Okay, sure. Completely unnecessary.
I feel like maybe they when they started test screening it, there was one really obnoxious person who was like, I was confused at the beginning. I didn't like it.
Yeah, they probably got notes. I was confused at the beginning. I didn't understand what was going on, why they were all going to the square, what I didn't get any. It's like, well, yeah, you're not supposed to understand what's going on yet. It's called world building. It's fine.
It's called storytelling.
Yeah, it's fine. But
you'd be confused for a few minutes.
It's not even that long, and it's so funny because it's the exact same information.
Yeah, it's the same information.
And it's even a voice. It's not even you could miss it. It's here's what's going on video. It's in the first episode of Loki where the little he gets to the place and the little they play the little information video. Yeah, it's okay, we don't need the title, whatever, fine, sure. The next thing I thought was interesting in the book is there's a mention, we get some backstory about District 12 and where they live, and Katniss is talking about the fence that they sneak out of to go hunt in the woods.
Yeah.
And there's a mention of something that the fence keeps out flesh eaters, and now I didn't remember this. And when I was rereading it this time, I was like, flesh eaters. And my brain immediately went to zombies or something. And I was like, I don't remember there being zombies or anything like zombies in any of these books. And so I was really confused. And then it turns out that I think you're right.
Yeah, because I just took that as a reference to the dangerous predators in the area.
And that's what it is, I'm fairly certain. Because she does mention, but the way it's written, and I can't find the page.
I had to go back and find it because I didn't remember that. I didn't even pause to think zombies at all. It never crossed my mind. Because they live in Appalachia.
Yeah.
Her district is Appalachia, basically.
Yeah.
So I took it mountain lions, bears, wolves.
Yeah.
Any number of other things.
The exact sentence is, electrified or not, the fence has been successful at keeping the flesh eaters out of District 12. And to me, that word
is a little
choice
bit of an odd way
now
to
before
put it.
that, a couple paragraphs before, she says, in theory, it's supposed to be electrified 24 hours a day as a deterrent to the predators that live in the woods, packs of wild dogs, lone cougars, bears, that used to threaten our streets. And then it goes on, like I said, a few paragraphs later to do the flesh eaters line. But for some reason in my head, I this time read that as, so I went and did some Googling, and I found a Reddit post of somebody asking the exact same question, and it had a fair number of upvotes. But somebody explained the same thing, that no, it was just the predators, predator animals, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. I was gonna say that I liked the idea of it. I had this in better in the book because I was like, if that becomes a thing, they left this out. And then I actually was wondering, because the same person, the person on Reddit was thinking the same thing. I wonder if that wording, and then because there's another allusion to cannibalism later, one of the one of the contestants goes mad and starts eating people after they kill them. Yeah. Not in this Hunger Games, but in a previous one. And I was wondering, and we also know about the mutations or whatever, that the Capitol creates these mutated genetic
they genetically
predators.
Splice shit.
Yeah, and so I was I was wondering if maybe this was an abandoned plot thread of
Hunger
some
Games.
sort of
Hunger Games used to be a zombie novel.
Zombie creatures that she decided was, and I guarantee that's probably not it. It's just, again, when I read it this time, it was very confusing.
Zombies would be a lot to put on top of everything else going on in this story.
I agree. That's why I was blown away when I read that and was like, wait, there aren't zombies. No. And my clue should have been that it wasn't capitalized. Because if it was a thing, flesh eaters would have been probably capital. You know what I mean? Because all the other
and it never
creatures
comes back.
No, not at all.
They never mention it ever again.
Not at all. Not at all. The other next note I had was just a little detail line that, and I think it's just something that there's a handful of lines I have over the course of the book that are things that Katniss thinks or whatever that we get sort of from the narration. And this line I thought when she's discussing the setting of District 12. And talking about the fence and stuff, she says District 12, where you can starve to death in safety because their fence keeps out predators, but everybody's like, there's a whole section, which I actually had a note about, there's a whole discussion of how people routinely starve to death in District 12. And the movie doesn't, like, it's clear that it's an impoverished area in the movie, but I don't think the movie did a particularly good job of getting across the fact that, like, people routinely starve to death here.
Yeah.
It's not just like a poor neighborhood. It's like there's people that just don't eat, like, and die a lot.
One of the first things that we do in both the book and the movie is catch up with, well, we've already met Katniss, but then we catch up with her friend Gale. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't put my finger on quite what it was, but I didn't think that their dynamic translated to the movie to quite like what it was in the book.
I don't disagree.
And maybe it's just because we don't spend quite as much time with them.
We spend very little time with them in the book too, but little bit more. But
they're more like, it's a little bit more, and they're more like, because we're in Katniss's head in the book, like she thinks about like other stuff that she's done with him more, and like wonders what he's doing. Yeah, she thinks about their relationship, and I'm not sure that translated. I think that's one of the things that we lost by not being in her head.
I agree. I think it does come across a little more like typically like love interesty in the movie, whereas in the book it comes across much more complex and unsure. And again, part of that is because I think we get to hear Katniss, like her feelings of of uncertainty about like what she feels about him, kind of, and like what their whole thing is. Because she definitely views him. I agree. I think it's just it translates pretty well, but I'm interested to see in the future movies, because obviously he plays a slightly bigger role in future movies, and in the future books, because he plays a bigger role in the future ones, because he just wasn't. He's in like the very beginning and the very end of this one, and that's about it. But I don't disagree that I think it is slightly different, but I don't know how they would do it better without giving us like a voiceover. I agree. So
the book also mentions that her and Gale look alike, like to the point where they could be siblings, which I thought was interesting.
I think they could. I think you could say that about the movie. I don't.
Could. But
I mean, they're just dark-haired, pretty people. I don't know. Like they don't look particularly related, but you could. I don't know. Some siblings don't really look that much alike, so it could be fine. There's also a fact that they talk about how, or we find out that Katniss, she mentions that she used to like, she's learned over the course of her life to keep her opinions to herself, because she talks about how when she was younger, she used to like spout off about politics a lot more and got in trouble for it and stuff. So now she is like much quieter and reserved and doesn't kind of, put her opinion out and stuff in the same way that she did when she was younger. And I don't know how they would bring that across in the movie necessarily, again, because it's something she just kind of, we hear her talk about, or think,
Yeah,
she narrates it to us, but
he would have to do a flashback.
Yeah,
I think.
But I think it is an interesting, because that is one of the distinct characteristics of Gale, is he is very outspokenly
well, at least
antagonistic,
with her,
at least with her, yes. And she isn't as much with him. She like agrees with him and stuff, and she used to be more so. And I think there's even some, I don't, because we don't know how he talks about the Capitol and stuff in the wider world. Like we don't know if he's spouting off, but there could be some interesting gender politics in there if he is somebody who still feels comfortable being a little bit more outspoken in his criticism, that he can get away with it.
Yeah, that could be
as
interesting.
a guy, whereas she is not able to get away with it in this society in the same way that he is. Maybe, I don't know. Again, we don't ever find out like what he's doing.
Yeah.
When they're not together, we get like literally 2 scenes of him in this book. So yeah, we don't know. But I thought it was an interesting little thing that she was somebody who used to kind of mouth off and had it beaten out of her.
So one of the first big changes that they made in this movie was how Katniss gets her Mockingjay pin. In the movie, we see her buy it. Well, I guess the lady just gives it to her.
She's at the
like,
hub. The hub,
yeah, like the black market area. But in the book, she gets it from the mayor's daughter.
The mayor, after she is selected at the reaping, right? I believe that's when it happens. The mayor's daughter comes in and gives her this pin, and this mayor's daughter is a character we set up a little bit in that her name's Madge, and she's somebody that Katniss isn't really friends with, but she goes there to trade. When Katniss is hunting, she goes to trade squirrels and stuff to the mayor, and so she interacts with the daughter a little bit. And the daughter gives her this pen, and we both had this note of preferring the book's version of it coming from the mayor's daughter, but both understanding why they changed that, because I actually had a note when I was reading. I was like, bet they changed that for the movie.
Yeah, I understand eliminating another character and another interaction, because we would have to see them interact initially
and know who she is and why,
understand why she matters. But I do feel like the fact that she gets the pin from someone who is ostensibly in like the power class, quote unquote, matters.
Yeah. Yes, it's also one of those things that the movie, because we don't really know anything, the mayor's not in the movie at all, and I don't know how much, if any, of a role like the mayor and Madge play in future books. I don't recall, but you get the inkling in this book that both the mayor and Madge are, while being in positions of privilege, as relative privilege compared to the rest of the people, are not capital lackeys. Like they're not fans of the Capitol and this whole situation, and are in fact more sympathetic to the people in their district that are being kept in poverty essentially. And I think there is an interesting dynamic there that the movie misses out on by having her just kind of find it.
Yeah, and it's also our first inkling that maybe there is some kind of underground thing that Katniss and we, by extension, are not yet aware of.
Not yet aware of, yeah. I mentioned it in the summary that the reason that we're in a not post-apocalyptic, but a post-current society,
post-apocalyptic-ish.
A dystopian future is because of climate change, essentially. And it's made very clear early in the book, and it is kind of alluded to in the movie, but not as obvious. It's not as clear in the movie that the reason this has all happened is because of climate change, whereas in the book it is very clear that is exactly the reason that that society broke down and that we have Panem is because there was a climate catastrophe essentially, and they lost a bunch of the coast. There's a mention of a lot of the coast flooded, and on top of other things related to climate change. And I wish the movie had been a little bit more on the nose with that. And again, it's alluded to from my memory in the movie. There's some mention of something.
I mentioned doesn't the propaganda film mention famine and disaster or something like that?
Yeah, I feel like there's an allusion to it, but it's not in the book. Like I said, it's just very obvious that climate change just fucked everything. That's why the society broke down and had to be reestablished into this nightmare situation.
So the book, I think, has a better, more in-depth explanation of the reaping system, which very clearly favors the wealthy.
Yes.
Here in District 12, and in other districts a little bit different, because there are districts that are wealthier where you have volunteers and things like that.
But it still favors the wealthy.
Right. It still favors the wealthy. And the movie alludes to the tesserae. I guess is how you would say that.
Tesserae, which is
right, where you can put your name in additional times to get things like fuel and food.
You get a tesserae for every time you put your name in the pot, and that and each one of and from what it sounds like in the book, each one of those tesserae or whatever is like an allotment of grain and oil and like some certain amount of different supplies that people need. You put your name in, you get a bundle of that stuff.
Right.
So the more times you put your name in, the more of that stuff you get. And it's explained that Katniss put her name in a bunch of times.
And as we know, everyone in this district is starving to death.
Yes.
So.
And even the stuff they get isn't that good. It's not like you get like,
it's like shit grain.
Yeah, you get garbage wheat and like and oil essentially to keep your house warm in the winter. But it's not like they're getting like prime cuts of beef or something by like doing this. They're getting literally just the most meager substance or stuff to keep themselves alive over the course of the year by putting their names in more time. And it is, again, the movie does mention
movie
it.
alludes to it. There's
2 lines, I think.
Yeah, like the one I'm thinking of, before Katniss has to leave, she tells Prim not to put her name in.
Yeah, well, and she says to Prim before they go to the reaping, she goes, "Your name's, it's your first year. Your name's only in one time. You're not going to get picked."
Yeah.
Again, kind of setting that up, and then when she's talking to Prim, she does say, "Don't put your name in extra times."
Yeah.
Gale will take care of you or whatever.
Yeah. So the movie like alludes to this idea.
I'm not sure how clear it would be.
But I'm not sure how clear it would be to anyone who hadn't read the book.
Yeah.
And it's such a good world building detail.
Yeah.
For this particular universe.
Yes, and it's also one of the things that does a lot of legwork early on in building the thematic elements that the whole trilogy is going to be covering in terms of exploitation of labor and all that sort of stuff that is the thematic through lines of this book series, which is a deeply
how poor people are kept poor,
yes,
and how that is used against them.
Yeah, and how being poor costs more.
Yes,
like it is in fact
being poor is very expensive.
Being poor is incredibly expensive, and it literally costs more. And in this universe, it costs more by literally putting your life into a lottery machine that where the odds are you'll just be murdered at the end of it. And so, I think I wish that the movie had been more explicit with that. Who knows? Maybe the future ones will get a little more into that. Because I do think we'll talk about it more later. But I'm hoping that they kind of lean more into some of that stuff in the next stories. There's no explanation of the Mockingjay in this movie.
Yeah, no.
So the pin she has is a Mockingjay, and the birds that sing that Roos whistles and sings to are Mockingjays. Mm-hmm. In the book, we get an explanation of like what Mockingjays are and where they came from and all that sort of stuff. And I thought it was really interesting. And I was really, because actually as I was reading it, I was like, oh, this would be a really good idea, because she tells us in the book that her dad told her what Mockingjays were, like they were hunting or something. Yeah,
I think they were hunting, and he explains what they are and demonstrates what they can do by like singing.
Yeah,
I believe is what happens in the book.
Yeah, and so the movie just doesn't go into it at all, and maybe they will in a future one. Maybe they thought they'd save that for again a sequel. But I thought it would have made a ton of sense that when she gets the pin, my mind is when Madge gives her the pin, or however she gets the pin in the movie, is just have a brief flashback in that moment when she sees the pin with the Mockingjay on it. Brief flashback to that time with her dad hunting.
Yeah.
And him because one, we get the explanation, but two, we also get character building for Katniss of this and her dad. Like we get this dynamic
and we
with her dad.
We don't get any of her dad in this movie.
And he's barely in the book, to be fair. Like the fact that he's not around is a big and like his death and everything is a big component of Katniss's character. But he's not. That's like the only time he's really mentioned, or we get anything resembling like a scene with him is that. That her just talking about when he told her about the Mockingjay. But to me, it made perfect sense to take this and just show us a flashback with her dad and him telling this story again, because then we get to see their relationship and how like, and again, it just, to me, that's just a very easy way to do some easy character work and character building of Katniss.
Yeah, and then and we see them like in the woods and they're hunting and they're interacting. So now we understand that that's where
that's where she
element
learned how to
comes
hunt.
from.
Like
Yeah.
it's just like so you can do so much legwork in that one scene,
and it doesn't even have to be long.
It could be less than a minute.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be long, but you could do so much legwork there. Of you have a little aside where she shoots an animal and he says like, oh, you're getting better every day or something. Like so much you can do there to establish so much character stuff, and it's really surprising to me that they didn't do that.
Yeah.
And again, I guess maybe they're saving that for something in a future movie, maybe. But it just seems like a real big obvious miss. It was so obvious to me. I was like, I guarantee that has to happen.
Yeah.
And it didn't. And
maybe they didn't want to cast a young Katniss.
that was my only other thought, is that because it would have to be like it couldn't be Jennifer Lawrence.
Yeah,
it
would have to be somebody younger,
else.
but she'd have to look pretty
you could
close.
Just find somebody. I don't
mean,
know.
yeah, you could.
Yeah, I don't think it would be that big a deal. Maybe they didn't want to cast her dad yet. I don't know if her dad has any more flashback scenes, and I can't remember.
Yeah,
anything
maybe they
about,
didn't want to. Maybe they didn't want to commit to somebody as her dad.
I don't know. That's purely a guess, because I don't think he comes again from I don't remember almost anything about the books, but I don't think he really comes up again, other than in passing, maybe in mention of him having died. But so that's the only thing I can think is they didn't want to cast her dad yet. But I doubt that's the case. Just disappointing. So would have been so easy and so good.
So after it is established that Katniss will be going to the Hunger Games, she gets a couple minutes with. I mean, in the book, it's like basically anybody who wants to come in and see her.
Yeah.
And she does talk with more people than we see in the movie, which I totally understand cutting some of that stuff. But I did like the more extended goodbyes in the book where we talk to people like a little bit more. I thought it was funny. The movie, they're like, oh, you have 3 minutes, and then they get shoved out after like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm like, why even say 3 minutes if you're not going to do that?
Yeah.
And like, it's not a huge deal. We still get most of the most important stuff.
Yeah, I mean, especially since they changed how she gets the pen, and they
Yeah,
cut
we
Madge
don't need to
Mayor.
have Madge come. We don't really need to have the baker come and say anything.
I was going to
to
say
her.
that he would have been more interesting than, again, since they changed how she gets the pen.
Yeah.
I think having Peeta's dad come could have been interesting. Maybe, I don't know. It's not really necessary.
And I don't know if that's something that's relevant in a later book.
Probably not.
No?
I don't know. I don't remember. I truly remember so little about the books that I don't know.
Because it doesn't end up being super relevant that his dad comes and sees her in this book.
No. I mean, she mentions it to him later on.
Yeah.
That his dad came.
But it's not like something that weighs heavily on the plot or anything.
No. Or even emotionally on anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So ultimately, we move forward and get to the train as they're being taken to the Capitol, and there's their first interaction with Haymitch, who is their trainer, and it's pretty similar in the movie and book, but in the book, like Haymitch punches Peeta, which I thought was fun, and then Katniss stabs the table. She does that in the movie. I just liked the antagonism in the book a little more. I felt like it was. I don't know. Something about that way that scene played out in the book. It kind of plays out in two separate scenes in the movie.
Yeah.
And in the book, it's all like one big scene, kind of. And I just thought it was, I don't know, more tense in the book. Whereas I don't know. I don't have strong feelings, I guess. I could just delete that. I don't know. It's fine.
I had a note about this later, and I'm realizing that I should have moved it out of my general notes, so I'll talk about it now. But I think the train ride in the movie is pretty, like, tonally different from what we get in the book.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Like, I guess it's not a huge difference, but one of the things that struck me about the train ride in the book was that, like in the book, they aren't enjoying themselves exactly, but it's obvious that they're at least a little bit enthralled with all of the, like, luxury and the plenty. And there's the little bits about, like, them chugging hot chocolate and just, like, stuffing their faces.
Yeah. Yes,
which I didn't feel like we got in the movie.
It doesn't come across in the movie. They're just kind of like
worried
shock.
and upset.
Yeah, which is they are that as well.
Yes.
in the book. But yeah, you're right that it does miss the.
It's an interesting mix of things in the book where they're not happy to be there.
No.
But also they're like chugging hot chocolate.
It's like there's hot chocolate. Have you
tasted this?
Have you tasted this thing? It's called hot chocolate. It's wild. Yeah. No, I agree. I thought the same thing. I also thought that, and again, because we're not in Katniss's head, they can't really do this, but on the train, there's a scene where when they get in front of this giant spread of food, there's this little moment where Katniss looks at everything, and we get this running little monologue in her head of her sort of taking mental notes of what she would have to do herself in order to make an equivalent meal to what they're eating. And it's this big long list of like labor that she would have to do in order to have like the same kind, like she's like,
in order to have something even remotely
close. And even then she says it would be like a poor, like a bad version of what they're eating. But she's like talking about how she'd have to, kill an animal and trade. I try to imagine assembling this meal myself back home. Chickens are too expensive, but I could make do with a wild turkey. I'd need to shoot a second turkey to trade for an orange. Goat's milk would have to substitute for cream. We can grow peas in the garden. I'd have to get wild onions from the woods. I don't recognize the grain. Our own Tessera rations cooked down to an unattractive brown mush. Fancy rolls would mean another trade with the baker, perhaps for 2 or 3 squirrels. As for the pudding, I can't even guess what's in it. Days of hunting and gathering for this one meal, and even then, it would be a poor substitution for the capital version. Yeah. So yeah, I thought that was again illustrating another one of those moments in the early part of this book, illustrating just the insane discrepancy between the lives that people in District 12 lead versus the lives that the people in the capital lead. The people in the capital being, the 1% here essentially. It just like literal days of labor for her to make this meal that they don't even. It's just every meal is just every meal. Yeah, this is every meal. And I just thought it was again a little world building, not even thematic moment that helps set up some of the messaging that we're going to be pushing through the rest of the series, I would imagine. And we still get it because we get shots in the movie, like kind of extravagant shots of them looking at, like when they see the food, there's like these kind of lingering shots of them like taking this all in and being like blown away by it. But it's not quite the same.
Well, it's not quite the same, and it doesn't help too that the movie doesn't do as good of a job of letting us know that people regularly starve to death in District 12.
Yeah.
So it's not as meaningful.
Yeah.
I don't think. When we do eventually arrive at the Capitol, they arrive on the train, and we meet her styling team, essentially. And in the book, we spend like a little bit more time with the like assistants, because her main stylist is Cinna.
Yeah.
But we meet also his like assistants.
Yeah.
And I preferred them in the book.
They're not really even in.
They're not really even in the movie.
They're in one of the meals or something.
They're in that one scene. I think it's supposed to be them where they're like waxing her legs.
Yeah.
And they're kind of catty.
Yeah.
To her in the movie, and I preferred the book because in the book they were like super oblivious.
Yeah.
But kind of sweet.
Yeah.
At the same time,
yeah.
Like they were obviously like nice and like they cared about her in their own way, but they were also just like super oblivious.
Well, and that's one of the things that I think this book does a really good job of doing in general, and I think Effie, and from my memory, Effie is kind of the main version of that. Whereas it's not just even the people in the Capitol. Most of them, they're not like evil, vindictive people. They're just oblivious and born into the same. They're born into luxury the same way.
They don't know how the other half lives.
Yeah, they're born into luxury the same way that. Well, and they know to some extent, but they're indoctrinated into this society the same way that the people in District 12 are and everybody else is. And it's not an excuse necessarily that they're not, that the people of the Capitol aren't like pushing for better conditions for the other. But there is at least, I think, some sympathy to the idea that in this book, at least it feels like it to me, to the idea that none of us pick our where we end up in life, and so it's not purely like on them to like realize that, like they're also a result of, again, the indoctrination, the system that they're born into, a
product of their society.
Yeah, and I don't know. And
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head talking about, like, they're not all necessarily bad, like they're not evil,
right?
Because, you know, even if you are aware of how horribly somebody else's living conditions are, I think when you live in a society like what we see in the Capitol, it's hard to fathom it.
Right.
I think you can know it
Yeah.
in like a clinical academic way, but I think it's hard to actually grasp what that means.
Yeah, and I think it's fair because I mean you could extrapolate that. Like, it's easy for us, you know, for a lot of people to kind of extrapolate that out to, okay, so this is the capital people are the 1%. I said that earlier, and you know they're the people that are living this wild lap of luxury. And while there's tons of people out there who huge swaths of people, just narrowing this to the U.S. currently, who you know, live in poverty and literally do starve to death and stuff every year. And so you can look at it that way, but it's also, if you expand the scope beyond America, we become the people in the capital, and the global South become the people from District 12. So me and you literally are the people in the capital who aren't evil, and who, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you can expand that scope out, and then all of a sudden the people who are exploited in other countries to produce the fucking trinkets we buy, and you know, we're aware of that at least, but we don't.
Yeah.
What are me and you actively doing to fix that? Fucking trying to vote for the right people, but even that, it's not. You know what I mean? So you know, I think you can look at it multiple ways, and but I do think there's at least that angle to it, that it's, when you're part of that system, and it's I don't know, it's very complicated, and we'll see, because like I said, from my memory, Effie's character makes a journey in these in these books, and so I think that's one of the kind of through lines that we should keep track of is what is Suzanne Collins saying about the people of the Capitol, and by the end of the series, what, you know, where do they end up?
What conclusions can we draw?
What conclusions can be drawn from that? So it's mentioned in the movie that they have wild showers. PETA mentions it in his interview with Caesar, but we get to actually see it in the book. I say see it, but we get to read the descriptions of it in the book.
Visualize it in our mind's eyes.
And of these fancy showers they have that like spray millions of jets of water in different you know, directions, and then like different all kinds of crazy shampoos and soaps and all this sort of different stuff. And then they have a wild electric hairdryer that I imagine, from what it sounds like, is if you've ever been to like a science museum and you do the thing where you put your hand on the ball and your hair stands up. That's what it's described as.
And it just automatically dries your hair, and
dries
then it,
and
like,
untangles,
settles into perfect waves.
Yeah, and that's like what the hair dryer is described as in this book series, and I was disappointed we didn't get to see
I know.
that.
There were little things here and there that I so wish the movie would have portrayed.
Yeah, the fancy shower and hair dryer would have been cool to see. So this is kind of a relatively big cut from the movie, at least, especially going forward. I feel like
hoping this comes up in maybe the next movie. Maybe
I would think it would have to,
it.
but maybe not. So there's this character in the book, and she doesn't have a name. She's the redheaded Avox girl. And Avox are people who have been essentially become slaves of the Capitol, had their tongues cut out.
They're like
usually for treason.
Yeah, they've been convicted of treason.
Yeah, and they get their tongues cut out, and they end up essentially being servants in the Capitol, slaves in the Capitol. And one of these is a character that Katniss is a girl that Katniss recognizes, and we get this whole flashback of her remembering this time she saw this guy and this girl running through the woods. And they didn't do anything to help them. They didn't know what they were doing. It was just random people were running through the woods, and then the guy ends up getting killed, and the girl gets captured and taken away by a hovercraft. And Katniss is like, oh, that was her. And they explain, like Haymitch and them explain that, yeah, she was convicted of treason, blah, blah, blah. Don't say you know who she is. Like, that's not a good thing to say. We do see her in the movie. Yeah. She's in the background.
Yes.
In several scenes, I assume that's her. There's a redheaded girl who's got like white face paint and is like part of the waitstaff, clearly.
Yeah. And I don't know. I'm hoping that they retouch on that thread, like in the next movie, maybe.
I'm thinking they will, because again, this is one of those moments where it feels like very clearly setting the breadcrumbs for this underground,
right?
Potential revolution that's kind of building, fomenting. And now we don't know if she would have been part of that or if she was just running, because again, they were running. Like, we don't know if she was. We don't know
what their story is.
Maybe she was part of some sort of revolutionary group, or maybe she literally was just. They were trying to do what Katniss and Gale had talked about. We're just trying to go live in the woods or something. Who knows? But if it was the first thing, if they were part of some like revolutionary group potentially, that would be interesting. And yeah, hopefully if that is the case, we'll get more of that, because that seems important again for the events of future books. It would seem that we would need a little bit more there.
So they've been in the Capitol for a day or two now, and we are starting to meet the other tributes.
Yeah.
In like training. And there's one particular tribute, Cato, who ends up being more of a major character as the story goes on. And one of the first things that we see him do is like pop off and try to fight one of the other tributes, which is against the rules. And he doesn't do that in the book.
No.
And I didn't think that he would, because he's a career.
Yeah. They definitely amp him up in the movie a little bit in terms of like making him more of like a hothead, like psychopath, but I don't know. I could see it in the book still. He is a career, but at the same time, even then being a career, like it's not like they do this every year. This is, only do it one time.
But I just feel like he would know better.
Yeah. And I guess he does know better, but he's also like a broken person. Like he's, I don't know. It didn't bother me that much, but it is something that is different from the book, because he doesn't try to fight anybody. Also, we have this during this whole training montage in the with all the competitors. They're training in the Capitol, and we hit this one shot in this montage that is somebody. It's a redheaded girl using a big computer, and what we see on the computer screen, she's like, her hands are flying all over. Yeah, she's like Data type, like Star Trek TNG Data when he uses the computer. She's like, and what we see she's doing is like matching or something, plants and stuff.
Like learning to identify plants, I think is the idea.
Yeah, which is really funny to me because that's Foxface. And at the time I wasn't sure if it was, but I'm like, I think because she's redheaded. Yeah. I assume that's probably Foxface. And later in the book and the movie, Foxface dies because she doesn't correctly realize what a certain berry is and eats it and dies.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting that the movie had her be the person who was training on this identification thing.
I think it's interesting because I think there's a couple of ways that you could interpret that. One, you could say that maybe the movie just made a mistake.
That's how I would interpret. Well, maybe not a mistake. Yeah, I don't know.
Two, I think you could interpret it as that, like, maybe she was just bad at learning that.
I think that would be the more, but she's doing it so I think it's just clumsy. Like, to me, I bet they had her do that and then they didn't think about it at the time, and they had her do the action of using that computer, and then the only thing that made sense for her to be doing on the computer was doing like they were going to do all the computer stuff in post, and then they realized, oh well, the only thing she could be doing that makes sense is like survival identification stuff. So I guess that's what we got to do. I don't know. And then, but that's the thing that kills her later, is that she doesn't know these things, because she seems good at it at the time.
I also think you could interpret her then eating the berries as intentionally committing suicide.
I mean, I guess you could, but that's not what's happening. Like the
I
whole
didn't say
point,
it was. I said
Yeah.
you could interpret it that
right?
way.
Yeah, no, yeah, no. Like the whole point is that she takes him because she thinks they're going to eat him, and the whole time she's been scavenging for food. There's no illusion to the idea that she's somehow now suicidal or like wants to lose. Like I don't think that adds up, but I would disagree with that one. PETA in this book in this movie is played by Josh Hutcherson, and I think he does a good job playing PETA. Like I think he plays a good PETA. That being said, which I just realized, PETA, he's a fucking baker.
Yeah, he's bread.
Oh, that's terrible. That's a real J.K. Rowling name right there.
Katniss is a root.
Fair. All the names are kind of dumb, but it's the future, whatever. I don't think he looks like how I imagine. Not in the face, but PETA. Like the whole thing in the book is that PETA's strength is that he's strong, like physically strong, because he works in a bakery and like lifts a bunch of like flour and shit all day. And so like he's farm strong is like the idea you get. Kind of like Thresh, I would imagine, is similarly like, farmer strong, where you're not like...
Yeah, he's physical labor all day strong.
Yeah, but Josh Hutcherson in the movie doesn't look as big as I imagine PETA.
Not even close.
Or as stocky, like as built as I imagine. He's just kind of like... He's got some muscles, but he has like... I'm a 16-year-old movie star trying to put on some muscle for a movie. That kind of muscle. Not I work 12 hours a day.
He should be like a little bit of a wall of muscle.
Yes, he should be, and just bulky. Like he should be bulkier and
I think he's fine otherwise. He's like that kind of like wholesome Americana boy next door. Kind of look.
I think he works,
which is great for PETA.
Yeah,
but he does need to be bulkier.
Yeah, and especially because they make a big point of it where he goes and chucks a weight across the room.
Yeah,
but he doesn't look. He looks less strong. Like Katniss looks as strong as him. Like she's as well built as he is. I don't know. That was my biggest complaint.
Speaking of that moment, though, my next note is about that. He throws the giant weight thing to show up the careers. Yeah. Because Katniss is like, you need to show them that you're strong because they're looking at you like you're something to eat.
Yeah.
And it was silly in the movie. I hated it. I thought it looked so silly. He throws this, and it doesn't even do anything. No. It just, like, bumps the spear rack and knocks some of them off. Like, what? Who is that supposed to be impressing?
Yeah. I also think that it's one of those things where it's almost like a not really delivered upon setup in the sense of, like, the fact that PETA is strong is like his one strength, like his literal one strength in the games is that he's stronger than a lot of people, but that never really comes into play. Well, his other strength is his camouflage, which we'll talk about.
Right.
But like his strength never really comes into play, and so I thought it was in the movie or the book. Really,
like he does fight with Kato.
Sure.
But we don't
see him and he wrestles
do that.
him. Like, and he doesn't in the movie. He does like body slam Kato at one point, but he wouldn't have to be outlandishly strong to body slam.
No,
so you can be whatever. So the fact that he's supposedly really strong never, even in the book, didn't feel like that big of a thing that really mattered ultimately. And so I thought it was something they could have just left out of the book, and so adding. So still making it a point in the book, and I guess they did that for book readers, just like he's strong.
Yeah.
But then doing it in the way that they did, where this weird, like clumsy, like this weird kind of silly scene where he chucks a weight a distance, and like I don't know.
If they were gonna have him chuck a weight a distance, have it freaking do something when it hits. It looked so silly. Yeah. Like they would have all started laughing. Yeah, because it just looked so dumb and
it looked like, what were you trying to do?
Yeah,
like were you trying to throw it at that? Like,
were you trying to knock over the spears? Why?
Well, I mean, and the idea is that the weight is very heavy, and he threw it pretty far.
Yeah,
like for how big of a weight it was. But yeah, it just doesn't. I don't know. The whole scene's kind of dumb. And again, it's made even dumber to me by the fact that Josh Hutcherson isn't. he's smaller than most of the other.
Yeah.
Not smaller, but he's like, he's not. I don't know. It's fine. And it's just. I thought, this is a little silly. There's a line when we get to the interviews that I thought was really good in the book. It's just a very specific line that Katniss has to herself, to us, where she says it's when she's showing her dress off at the interview, and she starts spinning, and Caesar says something, and she starts giggling. And the line in the book is, "I'm also giggling, which I think I've done maybe never in my lifetime." Which the specific wording. There's a few bangers of lines in this. Like the wording is just really, really good. And that was a line that made me chuckle a lot when I read it. I think I've done maybe never in my lifetime. Maybe I like that line.
Something that I missed in the book, or in the movie about the book, was the obvious emphasis on their team, and particularly Cinna trying to put them together like they're a pair instead of individual competitors. And I think it comes through a little bit in the movie, but in the book there's a lot of emphasis on like that's not the way that things are usually done.
Right.
And like several times Katniss will be like, we're the only two that are dressed alike.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
Which is funny because in the movie everybody's dressed alike.
Yeah.
And which also doesn't make sense in the book because they mention that that District 12 always ends up dressed like minors, so they would still be dressed alike.
But in other outfits after like the chariots and stuff.
Yeah, I guess maybe the chariot. Yeah.
Because in the movie, like when they go to training, everybody's wearing like the same kind of uniform, just with the different district numbers. But in the book, it specifically mentions that like they put them in matching.
Yeah, they're both wearing like red smocks or something.
Yeah, and everybody else is not dressed like that.
Yeah, no, it is definitely, and it's a much more constructed thing that they talk about. I actually have a note a little bit in a different segment that I do kind of like it being more motivated by PETA in the movie as opposed to by the team. Kind of. I think that makes the ultimate destination of their relationship a little more tragic. Or at least even in this movie, like at the end when we find out, that she was acting and that PETA wasn't. I think that the fact that it's PETA who's kind of pushing this narrative a little bit more on his own makes it a little more tragic when it is all like an act. I don't know. When
Katniss is supposed to be demonstrating her skills to the game makers, when she misses with that first arrow, I didn't really like that the movie added them like laughing at her, because I feel like it's more impactful that they just don't care and like don't notice her at all.
Yeah. Oh, you mean, yeah, instead of, because they do actually turn and like look, well, because she announces herself.
Yeah.
And so I think it's better I also think it's better, makes more sense for her character if she just shoots it and while they're not paying attention and they just keep not paying attention. I was fine with the movie's version of them being like, oh yeah, I guess we got to pay attention for a second. And then as soon as she misses a shot being like, nah, because she does miss a shot in the book.
Right.
And so I thought the movie's version of it made sense, but I see what you're saying. Like, I get what you're saying.
There's also a mention in the book that before her interview, Katniss has high heel lessons with Effie, which I thought could have been a funny scene. Yeah.
Yeah, because she's never worn high heels before.
Right.
Ain't got no time for high heels in District 12.
What is her name who plays Effie? Give her more
Elizabeth
screen
Banks.
time.
Yes, I agree.
I need her teaching Katniss to wear high heels. I needed it.
No, that would have been a very fun scene. And I have a note about Elizabeth Banks later in a different segment because she's fantastic. And that more of her would have been great.
I was also a little bit disappointed that they left out during Rue's interview her talking about how she's hard to catch.
Yeah.
And if they can't catch her, they can't kill her.
Mm-hmm. During the interviews, I thought during the book, and I think you can still get caught up in this in the movie, but I didn't in the same way that I did in the book. I routinely, especially before the games start, would get so caught up in what was happening and sucked into the pageantry of it all that I would like forget.
Yeah, you almost forget where it's heading.
And that's the thing that I don't, maybe it does happen in the movie for people, I didn't feel exactly the same way. Maybe I didn't feel the same way in the movie because I had read the book and like I'm comparing it in my head the whole time, so it's a different experience. But yeah, during the book, I routinely would forget. It feels so much like a game show or like a reality TV show, and like I was like during the interview, like I wanted. Like in my head, I'm like wanting her to like do a good job in the interview and stuff, and I'm like, wait, what is? Again, like the book did a really good job of making me get caught up in the whole thing, and I routinely had to be like, wait a second,
Yeah,
no, this is stupid. Whatever. But I think that's the fact that it did that to me is a testament to the writing, because that's the point. Like that, the fact that. And it's a little bit of a window into how something like this could happen. Mm-hmm. The fact that even, in a place where the idea of this is so outlandish and so beyond the pale, in current day, our situation right now, even then I can get caught up in the pageantry and the showmanship of all the stuff leading up to it, that for a minute I forget how truly terrible it is and like ridiculous and just horrifying it all is. I think is a little glimpse into how something like this could potentially happen.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a little brief line after they all do their interviews where Katniss says something to the effect of they're playing the anthem, the national anthem of Panem, and she's like, I have to raise my head out of the required respect. Whew.
Yeah.
Given all of the discourse around the national anthem,
missed that, but that is a good
in this country.
Yep. Have to raise my head out of the required respect.
There's one that rings a little close to home.
Yep. I thought this was a little detail that would have been really good to see in the movie, and I was really disappointed that it wasn't in the movie. Is when they're getting ready to go to the arena, they're saying goodbye to the team or whatever, because Cinna's the only one that's going to be at the launch place or, where they go into the arena. And she says goodbye to Effie, and Effie actually tears up during their goodbye. And again, a little character moment that I think would have made a lot of sense, again, knowing a little bit of what I know about where that all goes eventually. I think it would have made a lot of sense to have that moment with Effie, to kind of give a little bit more to her character beyond just... She's a lot of fun in the movie, but even beyond that, to give her a little extra layer of depth that she has in the book. Surprised they didn't do that in the film. They're also mentioned that, and I mentioned it earlier, that there's a little story about how a guy named Titus from one of the previous games lost it in the ring, and after he killed people, he started trying to eat them. And the Capitol was like, no, that's not acceptable, and had to stop that and killed him to stop that from happening. And I was like, I wish there had been some mention or something of that, because those little moments of idiosyncratic stuff where the Capitol has these weird lines about what's fine and what's not, I thought was really interesting. And this is one of those moments where it's like, oh yeah, you go in there and brutalize each other on television for us all to watch while we're eating dinner, but don't eat them. That's
come on
now. That's yeah. And I like, again, I think that adds something to the character of the powers that be that I wish had been in the film, but it's a little detail. I understand why it's not there. Also, this is the same kind of thing. They mention, Cinna mentions, or maybe Katniss does, that the old arena, they only use each arena where they do the Hunger Games once.
Yeah.
And they build a new one or whatever, and the old ones become tourist sites where people go on vacations. And I was like, yep, that would have been another great...
That's exactly what would happen, too.
Yeah. That's another great, they go and they watch they go to the places where people killed where they won, all this sort of stuff. And the little details like that, I was just like, oh, I really wish there had been some way to work that into... Again, it's tough because this is something that Katniss just says, narrates to us as the reader, and it's not something we actually see or anything, but they could have come up with a way to do it. Would have been cool. Also, finally, not finally, but The last note about the Capitol, the building they're training in, they can go up to the roof of it, but there's a mention in the book that there's like a force field or something where if you tried to jump off the roof of this building, it like flings you back onto the roof.
Yeah.
So that competitors can't kill themselves before the game starts. Again, another one of those little details of the just wild universe that totally adds up and is like all makes sense, but it's all just those weird lines of like what's acceptable and what's not. I don't know. The whole thing. All those little details.
That's like an ownership thing. Too.
Yes,
that's
that's
the Capitol saying we own your life.
Yeah. You don't get to choose how you die. You go die in the ring for us for entertainment.
Now join me, if you will, on a rant.
Okay.
Katniss's freaking side braid in the movie.
Okay.
It doesn't make a lick of goddamn sense. The book specifies that her braid goes down her back. It says this several times. Her braid down her back. And now I get that side braids are more aesthetically pleasing. But that is the last style of braid you would ever want while you are actually doing shit.
Yeah.
Side braids are horrible. They do not stay in. They get in your face. They get in your mouth. They get in your eyes. Side braids are for sitting very still and taking a selfie.
Also, isn't it on her right side? I don't
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
Which she's right-handed.
Which is her arrow shooting side.
Which is the side she draws
so now
the
it's
arrow.
getting
So it's
tangled
even
in
worse.
that, too.
Literally,
It's horrible.
she's drawing the bow to the braid. It's like dangling right where the bow is, and like where when she has her bow drawn.
It's a horrible choice.
Terrible choice. It's 100% so that when you see the poster, when she's standing there in the poster, you can see her
hair.
braid.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
So it doesn't look like she has short hair or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a terrible choice. That is literally pick any other kind of braid and you have a much better choice than a side braid.
Yeah.
2 braids, braid down the back, French braid, Dutch braid, any other kind of braid.
Yeah. I have a note about this. Like, overall, this is a thing that I think the movie kind of fails at. And I have more about it in my final verdict and stuff. But one thing that the movie cuts completely is one of the big main struggles of the first part of when the game starts is Katniss trying to find water. Mm-hmm. She spends
a long time.
Dozens of pages. I don't know how long.
She almost dehydrates.
She almost dies
from
dehydration in the book. And the movie has her find water almost immediately. It's not even an issue. And I get it. I guess I understand that dying of dehydration isn't right off the bat isn't a particularly exciting thing to happen in your movie.
Well, and I think it would be a little bit challenging to portray. Maybe.
I don't think it would be hard to portray. I just think it would be hard to portray in an exciting way.
Yeah.
To get
in a compelling way.
Especially because she gets in and then it's immediately that's all that happens. She gets in there and she runs away. There's the initial skirmish where she gets the knife and stuff, which all plays out the same. But then she runs off into the woods and then just spends 3 days trying to find water and almost dying or whatever. And the book's like, nah, or the movie's like, nah, she finds water. She's fine. I prefer the book's version mainly because I think it ties into a more overarching failure of the movie. And I say failure kind of lightly. I don't mean it's not like a major failure, but it is something that I was disappointed in the movie. Is just the degree to which how brutal the games are in this, and even beyond just like them murdering each other, but just like almost dying of dehydration and stuff, and the injuries they sustain. I don't think the movie did a very good job of capturing how completely destroyed by the games Katniss and Peeta are, even as the winners.
Yeah.
They almost die. Both of them almost die several times each from various things. And I think that making it a little bit easier, it's not easy in the movie by any stretch. They still go through some shit. but making it a little less disturbingly brutal in the movie robs a little bit of the point of what is going on in the Hunger Games. And I just was disappointed that they cut her almost dying of thirst, because I feel like that's another one of those elements that
It's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, the movie definitely chooses to focus in more on the murder part of it, the fight to the death part.
Which is really funny, because I think part of the reason they didn't make like the injuries and stuff that we see as brutal as they are described in the book, like the stuff that happens to Peeta later, the stuff that Katniss goes through, the almost dying of thirst and all that sort of stuff. I think, and we talked about in the prequel how they didn't want to glamorize the violence and stuff in the movie, because the point is that it's not like if the director specifically was like, we use shaky cam and stuff because we didn't want to like make it this big glamorous violent like fun, we didn't want it to be 300, like that's not that's not what we're trying to go for here. But I think and it's a PG-13 movie, so there's also working within that, but I think by stripping out like some of the more horrifying, not the actual violence itself. I think doing the fighting the way the movie does it with shaky cam, where you don't see a ton, is fine, but the aftermath should have been more brutal, should have been more horrifying, like, because then I think if you do that, I think you're able to make your point doubly by not like making the fight scenes super fun, actiony, like Marvel movie looking fight scenes. You don't give us the fun like glamorization of the violence, but by then amping up the aftermath of the violence to the point that the book does, you reinforce that by like, the fighting, it's short and nasty and brutal, and like you don't even know what's going on. There's not really sound, because it's like that same kind of thing I think I talked about in an episode where when you get it in, when the adrenaline starts going, you almost don't even hear anything anymore. And I think that's all really interesting choices in the movie, but then take the aftermath of it and show that it's terrible. Like, and I guess part of that they couldn't do, again, because of the PG-13 rating, probably. Yeah.
I mean, they wanted fans of the book to be able to come see the movie.
Right, and I get that. I think, again, this little note about the dehydration thing ties into all of that, of just the games not being as brutal as they are in the book, and that, to me, is a slight failure.
No, I agree, and it's kind of funny, too, because they say in the movie that the majority of them will die from things like exposure and dehydration, but then they don't show us that at all.
Yeah.
And then Katniss lights a cooking fire after immediately finding water. She catches like a rabbit or a bird or something. I don't remember. And then immediately lights a fire to cook it. And she would know better.
Yeah, she must do it. I don't remember that. Is it in like that montage when she's...
Yeah, it's in the montage before.
Because
like,
there's
the
a scene right
night.
After this where she rolls her eyes at somebody lighting a fire, but they're doing it at night. Right. I guess she did it during the day or something.
Yeah, she did it during the day, but I mean, it would still send up smoke.
It could, yeah. You can build fires. Maybe I don't remember that moment. You can build fires in a way that they don't send up much smoke. Like, it's possible. So maybe she did that. I don't know. In the book, she does not cook anything until much later on.
Yeah.
She does eventually light fires, but it's like she picks specific times, like at dusk and dawn when the smoke gets in. Anyways. Yeah, she would probably not. She doesn't light a fire until much later in the book. I was also very disappointed for you, Katie, that the movie robs us of crop top Katniss. I made a specific note of this, hoping you would also make a note of this. Did. Okay. Because after the big fire and all the fireballs show up and she has to run and she gets lit on fire, her coat catches fire. And she rips it off and she stores it. And then later she's assessing the damage. And like the bottom half of the coat that Senna put on her is like all burned up. So she slices the bottom half off and then specifically has a crop top jacket. And I laughed a lot at that. And I was very disappointed it wasn't in the movie.
Also, like 6 inches of her braid get burned off.
Yes.
In the fire, too.
Yeah, and she has to rebraid it with like shorter.
Singed ends of her hair.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, again, it's a little like the hair getting burnt off again is a little thing with the just like that whole scene, like her hands get super burnt. Mm-hmm. And in the movie, it's just she has a kind of gnarly burn on her leg, which she does get in the book, but her hands are burnt, her hair gets burnt off. Like it's just...
Yeah, the brutality is not there.
Yeah.
When she is treed by the careers, there was a little moment in the book that I really wanted to be in the movie, and then it wasn't. I was disappointed, which is when Glimmer is trying to shoot her with the bow and arrow and keeps missing, and she like grabs one of the arrows from where it got stuck in the tree and like waves it at them.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Look what I have.
Yeah.
The arrow you couldn't hit me with.
So then she does cut down the tracker jackers on top of them as they camp out below her to kill her. And she gets stung by several, and they get stung by a bunch. And the movie's version of the hallucinations with the venom isn't terrible. Mm-hmm. But man, the hallucinations in the book are incredibly gnarly, and I was a little disappointed that the movie didn't. And that may have been a budget thing. The budget they ransacked the budget for this movie to get to 80 million or whatever. But a movie like this would often be twice that. And this is one of those moments where this could be a lot of visual effects and stuff. But the world begins to bend in alarming ways. A butterfly balloons to the size of a house, then shatters into a million stars. Trees transform to blood and splash down over my boots. Ants begin to crawl out of the blisters on my hands, and I can't shake them free. They're climbing up my arms, my neck. Someone's screaming a long, high-pitched scream that never breaks for breath. I have a vague idea it might be me. I trip and fall into a small pit lined with tiny orange bubbles that hum like the tracker jacker nest. Tucking up my knees to my chin, I wait for death. Then the ants bore into my eyes and I black out.
Yeah.
And I'm just imagining that being wild and gnarly and horrifying. And it's just kind of like trippy in the movie. They did like the easy version of it.
Right.
It's fine.
I did like that it got us a flashback of what happened to her father, and then like the aftermath with her mom, a little bit of that, because we don't get it otherwise.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's way more gnarly in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do like adding the flashback. I do agree with that. We do get a little bit of more information about like Rue's home district in the book that the movie just doesn't talk about at all, like it being a farming district and like what, like just story about her farming and like the Mockingjays and just that kind of stuff. I was a little disappointed that they leave all that out in the movie.
Yeah, all of that stuff got left out, which I thought was a shame, because I think that Collins had some stuff to say in that segment.
Yeah.
These notes are like 10 pages long, you guys.
Yes, we're on page 3 and we're an hour and 20 minutes in. So okay. I don't know what's going to happen. It's a 4-hour episode.
They also have a conversation about how taking out the supplies is the best way for them to beat the careers, because the career tributes don't actually have any survival skills. They just have murder skills. They
just train for the fighting part.
Yeah,
because
they don't train for how to survive.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really kind of poignant way to illustrate the difference between people like the career tributes and people like Katniss and Rue.
Yeah.
Who might not know how to fight like as well as the others do, but they can survive in the woods.
Yeah. So after she does blow up all their food, she gets blown across the field like she does in the movie. But in the book, after she gets up, her left ear is bleeding and she can't hear out of it. And she literally can't hear out of it for the rest until she gets done with the games and they heal it or whatever. And I have this in better in the book. It is like a major potential hindrance, but it never actually comes into play.
Yeah,
you're right.
Way. It never actually hinders her.
Yeah. Which I was like, okay, in that regard, especially because it's something they would have to like just allude to by her being like,
in that regard, it is an easy cut.
It's an easy cut because it never comes into play. There's never nobody sneaks up on her because she can't, you know what I mean? Like it never actually does anything. It's
right.
Just, it does add to the tension a little bit of her, not being able to hear out of that ear and makes her more scared and stuff, but it never It never comes to fruition.
Well, and it ultimately ends up not really meaning anything anyway, since the Capitol can just heal it.
Yeah.
Like, she doesn't have to be deaf in one ear for the rest of her life.
Yeah, they do heal
like,
it.
I mean, it's a good demonstration of how wild the Capitol's medicine is, but it's not really meaningful moving forward.
Yeah. So when Rue dies and then Katniss kills the boy from District 1 who killed Rue, the scene in the movie works fine. But in the book, there's this sentence, and this is another one of those sentences that I was like, holy Jesus Christ. Katniss shoots him. He stabs. It plays out in my head slightly different than it does in the movie. Like, he's like next to Rue in the book in my head, and then in the movie he's like behind them. Whatever, doesn't really matter. But in the book, in the movie, Katniss like shoots him in the chest, and he just kind of dies and falls over and dies. In the book, she shoots him in the neck, and the line is, he falls to his knees and halves the brief remainder of his life by yanking out the arrow and drowning in his own blood, which is fucking wild.
That's a hell of a line.
It's a hell of a line. Halves the brief remainder of his life is fucking all right. Metal. It's a metal ass line. That's all I'm gonna say about that.
And I think that's another good example of how these career tributes train for the fight.
Yeah, and not for...
But they don't have any of the actual knowledge that they need. Like, this kid clearly does not understand that you don't yank out something that's stabbed into you.
It doesn't matter in this instance.
I know, it doesn't matter,
way,
but
yeah.
Still.
Yeah. Oh, that line.
Also, I'm imagining... Suzanne Collins' Google history when she was doing research to write this novel.
Yeah. Then also, so after Rue dies and she does the like funeral for Rue and stuff, District 11 sends a gift to Katniss. They send her bread from their district, and she gets it, and she knows it's bread from their district because PETA told her about the different breads or whatever earlier. And it's a very specific type of bread that they make in their district. And it's a little and she has this moment of realization that, you know, they saw what she did, and she comments on like they would have all had to pull all of their money. You know, it would cost an exorbitant amount of money for the people in District 11 to have sent me this loaf of bread, because sending gifts to the tributes cost tons of money. Yeah, and so I thought it was a little detail that was. It's replaced by something I like more in the movies, which we'll talk about, kind of, but I still like that
it's
scene.
a nice little moment.
Yeah. Let's talk about the PETA camouflage scene in the movie.
His face is a rock.
It's... So... That scene just works much better in my head than it was ever going to in the movie.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the book, what they describe is basically that, like, he smeared himself with mud and, like, half buried himself in the leaves, which makes perfect sense.
Yes.
Makes way more sense than what's in the movie. It looks like, in the movie, it looks like he had a full-on paint kit with him.
That's the thing that's wild, is that in the movie... his face is part of a rock. Yeah. Which would mean he would have had to somehow paint. And now we see earlier on, he does paint his arm to look like a tree. Right. And they describe that in the book, that he, you know, because he decorates the cakes, and that's how he's good at painting because of, you know, this.
Of the cakes.
But in my head in the book, he's like laying next to the stream in like the mud. Yes. Like buried, kind of like Predator or something, you know, like buried.
Yeah, he's like buried himself in the mud, and he's got like sticks and leaves and junk.
Yeah, and his face is covered in mud, and so like she can and he opens his eyes, and then she's able to see him. But man, in the movie, with his face being part of that rock, it just looks so silly. Like it just
looks really.
It's like, how would he have done
ridiculous.
that? Did he get? Yeah, like you said, did he somehow have
he's got his
camouflage
his makeup kit with him?
I guess, yeah. It's just kind of dumb.
I'm picturing like the silver rolly suitcases that they have in Face Off. Yeah, he's got a whole his airbrushes and things.
Yeah, and they also cut my favorite line from that moment in the movie or in the book, where she stumbles across him and says, I don't remember what Katniss says to him, but PETA says to her, "Yes, frosting, the final defense of the dying." Which is a great line.
You know what? PETA was funnier in the book.
PETA
was
funnier
way
in the
funnier.
Book. Yeah. I was like, how dare you rob PETA of that line? I also really love, and this is one of the things that's hard to translate to the movie because, again, we can't hear Katniss's thoughts, but there's this fun meta game in the book of Katniss trying to figure out when the game makers are going to fuck with them again.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually have conversations with, like, her and Peeta actually have conversations, I think, in the book about this. So they could have done that. And I don't remember them doing it at all in the movie. Of like, okay, well, somebody died today, so that probably buys us a day where we can just sit in this cave and they won't like send a volcano after us or something.
Right. They won't try to flush us out.
They won't try to murder us. We should be
busy
fine.
with that other thing.
Yeah, like, oh, somebody, or this just happened, or even like, oh, us kissing is probably bought us some time.
Mm-hmm.
I love that like meta gaming element of it. I thought was super interesting in the book. Because it was something I was thinking about constantly after they establish, they will send a wall of fire at you to push people together. It's like you would always be on edge about how long you have. But something, because that's the other thing that doesn't really come across in the movie, that a couple times in the book we get her reminiscing about previous games. She's watched every Hunger Games, so she knows, okay, after something like this happens, usually we get a day worth of downtime before something else big will happen, or they'll make something else happen. So they have that now, and I just liked that element of the book that didn't translate at all in the movie, because we're in the moment just watching things happen. Anyways, little thing, but I like that. Also, when they're in this cave, so eventually they end up trapped in the cave because Peeta's dying, straight up dying. Again, this goes back to the thing I was saying before. In the movie, he's like got a pretty bad cut, but in the book, he is.
They say that the cut is like all the way down to the bone,
and it's just
he's hallucinating with fever.
Pus. There's pus coming out of the wound, and it's just gnarly and horrifying. And in the movie,
he's dying.
In the movie, they're like, "Oh, you got an infection; it's gonna kill you," but he seems mostly okay.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't.
He seems like he's all there.
Yeah, and it doesn't look that terrible. It just looks kind of like a bloody cut. I don't know. Again, same thing. But she tells him the story of how she got Prim's goat. Mm-hmm. And I liked that little backstory about how she got the goat, which was going to the butcher, and then the butcher's wife shows up to buy the goat, but ends up helping Katniss get the goat by like being like, that's garbage. That goat's terrible.
Garbage goat.
You'd be lucky to get anything for that, and like winking at Katniss and walking off. It was a little scene. I get why it's not in the movie, but I liked it. And like I said, knowing Katniss's thoughts really helps the weird tangled web of her motivations with Peeta and stuff, and it's much harder to get a grasp of that in the movie.
I think we lose a lot by not having her inner narrative in regard to how she feels or doesn't feel about Peeta.
Yeah.
A lot.
I agree. I 100% felt like it's like, you can't really... I mean, the movie tells us at the end that she doesn't have feelings for him or whatever, and that she was just acting, but getting her navigation of this relationship and what she's supposed to do and what she feels like she has to do versus what because she's not interested. I don't know. The whole thing was really interesting, and we'll talk more about it. But I think it's a weakness in the movie that I don't know if there's a good way to do it other than a voiceover, which I assume they just wanted to avoid. We also get the backstory for how Peeta fell in love with her, which is when they were little and she was singing, which is a fun little
Which we
story.
get a little bit of in the movie.
Do we?
But but not all of it.
Yeah, not as much. Also, Katniss has this realization in the book of how awful Haymitch's job must be. Because he like every year befriends these kids or doesn't befriend them, but whatever.
He's the only previous winner from District 12, so he has to be the mentor every year
for all of these kids, or for both of the kids. And he just every year he just meets these two kids and then watches them die every year. And it's just like, and she comes to that realization of like, good Lord, that must suck.
But like, of course he's an alcoholic. Yeah. Of course he is.
Yeah. Oh, she also comes to the realization in this moment that like Cato might not be completely mentally stable, which we kind of get to in the movie, and we'll talk about that. But her coming to that realization, I thought was interesting of her. And I guess that is kind of what the movie does, is they take it out of her head and verbalize it with Cato.
Right.
Kind of.
Yeah.
At the end of the movie. But I did like that realization of her being like, oh, he's something wrong with him.
He's not okay.
He's not okay. He's kind of a broken person.
I mean, he's been training to be a murderer for his entire life.
Yes.
So,
this to me was a big disappointment in the movie. I say big, but this scene is amazing in the book. I thought it's like a really fun little twist that you're not expecting, which is the reveal of the dogs, the mutations or whatever they're called. And in the movie, we get a setup of the game makers introducing these.
right.
Then they attack Katniss and Peeta, and they start running through the woods as they're getting chased by these dogs.
Right.
Eventually ending up on top of the cornucopia, and then running into Cato there and fighting, and everything goes down there. And that's similar to what happens in that part. Once they're fighting him on top of the cornucopia is basically what's going on in the book. But the way that we get there in the movie or in the book is way more fun, in my opinion.
Yes.
They're like, all right, well, Peeta's mostly healed, as he's gonna get. There's nothing else. Let's just go try to kill Cato and win the game or whatever. And
so at this point, they know he's the only one left.
He's the only one left, and there's two of us. We're not going to get any less hungry or less injured.
We might as well go try to kill this guy.
Yeah. And so I love that they go down to the lake and he's not there, and then they just wait by the lake and hang out.
Yeah.
Just maybe he'll show up. I don't know, which I thought was funny. I understand why the movie cuts that, but then he does show up and he's running at them, and he's wearing body armor, and she tries to shoot him, and the arrow just bounces right off because he got his thing that he got from the feast
was his
body armor, and he's sprinting at them. And she shoots at him, and the arrow blinds off. And then he gets up, and she misses again or something. He gets there, and she's expecting him to tackle her or whatever.
Right.
And he just runs right past them. And they're both like, "Wait, what?" And then they turn around, and all of these dogs come barreling out of the trees.
I am so disappointed.
Why?
They didn't. It could have been it was such a better scene.
That's such a good moment.
Yeah.
Why in the world would you cut that? That's such a movie moment too.
And you could still have the tease in the game maker room where they show the dogs.
Even if you wanted to do that, which I guess I get setting it up so it's not completely out of nowhere. I like it being completely out of nowhere.
I like it being completely out of nowhere too, but you could still do that and then have this tension of oh, where are the dogs?
Where are the dogs? Yeah.
And then they're chasing Cato.
Yes, because then once he runs past, then because the audience, you get to go on the same journey of oh, he's going to attack, and then he does it, and you're like, why didn't he? Oh, shit, because then you would realize immediately what he was running from. You have
a brief moment of dramatic irony where and they don't.
And Katniss and Peeta don't. Yeah, absolutely. So wild to me that they would change that. I don't understand it at all. At all. I don't get it. It's really weird.
It's a wild choice.
Because I love that. Also, I have to put this in better in the book. I thought it was another element of, again, just sort of demonstrating the wild cruelty of the Capitol, that we find out that the mutations are some weird Cronenberg monstrosities created out of the bodies of the dead tributes. In the book, those dogs, each of them is one of the dead tributes. Somehow, it's not explicitly clear what's going on there, and it's never driven into. But they say the eyes are the same eyes of the contestants, and they have similar physical features. And again, it's not obviously clear exactly what they did. But to me, it seems like they somehow reanimated their bodies and then combined them with wolves or something. I don't know. It's gnarly and horrifying.
Zombies, kind of.
Yes, it's gnarly and horrifying, and I was disappointed that they didn't do that in the movie.
I thought that was really interesting in the book. I was a little glad that they didn't go with that in the movie, just because I think it would have ended up looking silly.
I don't disagree. It would be tough to do.
Yeah.
Especially because it's she recognizes Rue, the hair and the eyes, and I don't, it would be, I think that was more one of the, we can't, how are we going to do this?
We can't do this and make it have the same impact.
No. Yeah. I agree, but still disappointed. I feel like they could have figured out a way to do it if they had thought about it a little while in the movie. There could have been a way to do it without it looking cheesy. Maybe not. I don't know. Again, same thing I mentioned before, just the brutality of games. At the end of in the movie, PETA is like fine.
Yeah.
In the end of the book, after they win the games and are after they kill Kato and they're sitting there waiting for the game to end and then they're told that, oh, you have to kill one of each other. PETA is literally bleeding to death.
Yeah.
Like, he will be dead in like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
He has a giant he got a chunk bitten out of his leg. He still has the wound from the knife or the sword, but he also got a giant chunk bitten out of his leg by one of the dogs, and he's just bleeding to death. Mm-hmm. And again, just disappointed that the book is like, nah, he's fine. Like, he's just fine. Yeah, sorry, the movie is just like, nah, he's fine.
Yeah.
It's just disappointing. Also, same thing. Katniss is described in the book as looking feral by the end of this whole ordeal. Her hair's completely matted. She's covered in dirt and blood and sweat and grime and mud, and just doesn't even barely look like a person anymore. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, that transformation, that physical transformation representing sort of the inner emotional toll this has taken on her, feels like a very obvious thing for a movie to utilize, and they don't, because I guess they want Jennifer Lawrence to still look like Jennifer Lawrence. I don't know.
They want her to still be pretty.
Yeah, so disappointing.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff from the end I was really missing. Like all of that, and like the doctors immediately taking PETA away as soon as they get picked up in the hovercraft.
Because he's got to go.
Yeah, because he has
operated
to go
on
right now,
or he's gonna die.
Yeah. And then they have like the super medicine in the Capitol where like they fix her ear, and then like even her old scars are gone from before the game.
They do a magic skin renewal thing to her that literally puts her like you said, all of her old scars, like her skin is like completely brand new.
Yeah, it's like baby skin.
Yeah, and during that whole time, they also take away. It's a little thing, but they do that to her without her consent. Mm-hmm. She's literally tied to a bed, and they routinely drug her into unconsciousness for like days. Yeah, like without any input from her.
And they wanted to give her breast implants while she was out.
Yes, that was my last note that I had one of my last notes that I had for the better in the book, is that they literally were going to give her breast implants because they give her Senna gives her dress for her, like the post games interview thing, and it has padding in the chest, and she's like, "What is this?" And he's like, "They wanted to give you breast implants, but Haymitch like lost it on them about that. It was so that she didn't look as like frail and malnourished and stuff from the ending of the Hunger Games. They just wanted her to look healthier." And I thought that was a little detail that I was really disappointed that the movie left out, and it felt like that to me. That almost felt like one of those things that the movie left out because it felt a little hit too close to home for maybe some movie executives and studios and stuff like that. Because there have been stories. I mean, there was a big blow up story about, I think it was Chloe Grace Moretz, like some movie or something putting like when she was like a 13 or something, I don't remember. She was very young. Some studio or something, they put padding in her dress. Yeah. And that was it came out a couple years ago, a big discussion about it, and making this 13-year-old look like she had bigger breasts or whatever. To me, I was like, this maybe they felt like this hits a little too close to home and was like maybe a little directed at themselves, and they weren't cool for that, weren't down for that. But yeah, I was disappointed the movie left that out.
Did the movie show PETA's prosthetic leg?
No, because he doesn't have a deadly injury. Like, he just has the cut's fine. He's not bleeding to death, and because she has to put a tourniquet on him in the book. Right. That's why he loses his leg in the book. Yes. Is she puts a tourniquet on him to keep him from bleeding to death, and then they have to end up putting a brand new leg on him because and again, it's the same thing. It's just like he's just fine. So yeah, he doesn't have a prosthetic leg. Super dumb.
There's a moment during their post interview that I thought would have been really easy to put in the movie, where they're still like acting. They're doing the whole lovebirds thing. Yeah. Where they're on the couch being interviewed, and she like kicks off her shoes and like snuggles up with him. Yeah. Yes. Again, playing. We don't see like much of the interview at all. We see a little bit of it, but not much.
Because that whole thing, I thought I was disappointed that they didn't explain or it didn't come across that one of the parts of that post-game interview is they literally sit there and watch a 3-hour long video of the entire Hunger Games, and literally just the champions are forced to sit there and watch all of the people die again, including people they killed and their friends and stuff like that, for 3 hours in front of an audience. Just like sit there and have PTSD in front of all these people. And I was like, oh, movie, why would you not leave that part out? That's another big, like,
kind of important
thematic moment. And it's wild to me that they left that out. Or at least, again, any sort of reference to it. Because I can really envision a fantastic scene. Because it could even be a short montage of a brief replay of the games, cut to the audience clapping and cheering, and Katniss and Peeta just like... you know, with like the 10,000 yard stare, just like zoned out, trying not to pay attention to the fact. So disappointed in that.
We didn't get at the end of the movie Peeta realizing that Katniss was acting. Which I'm assuming we'll get at the beginning of the next movie, because I feel like it's probably important moving forward.
From my memory, that whole dynamic gets very complicated moving forward. So I think it does come up, but it's possible they just wanted to save it. Maybe save it till the beginning of the next movie so that it's a little bit fresher in people's minds or something like that, I guess. All right. That was it for the first third of this episode.
That's our longest
No, that is our longest segment. The other ones are considerably shorter. We should be able to move through them a little bit quicker. So let's get to our next segment, Better in the Movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
So I really liked making Seneca Crane and the Game Makers, period, but specifically Seneca Crane, a character in this movie. He's mentioned in the second book, but in retrospect, because I believe what happens in this movie is roughly what happened. Again, from my memory, it's been so long, and I only read these books once. But he is mentioned in the second book, and they took him and just made him a character in this one. And I thought that was just a smart idea.
Yeah,
just
that
to
seems
give us,
like a good decision.
Yeah.
I had no idea what his name was for the entire movie.
I think they
whole
say
thing.
it at the very beginning, don't they?
I must have
I think when
missed it.
Caesar's interviewing him at the beginning, I think he says, "I'm here with Seneca Crane, Game Master," or like what I thought, but I could be wrong about that.
I had no idea. I was like, and now here's this man that I don't know again. He's doing things.
With the facial hair.
That guy.
Yeah.
I liked that once we got to District 12, we started...
Speaking of Seneca Crane, that was his real facial hair.
Oh, God.
And he would like go to like Target and stuff while they were filming with that facial, like in North Carolina or wherever they were filming. Like he would go out in the world and just have that facial hair.
Once we did get to District 12, I liked that we started with Katniss singing a lullaby to Prim, especially since that's something that we see happen later on with Rue in both the book and the movie. I liked that we kind of planted that. I also really enjoyed the opening visuals of District 12.
Yeah.
I thought it looked true to the book. I thought it nailed Appalachia.
It is it's not.
I say as someone who's never been to Appalachia.
It's in North Carolina, which I don't think they go quite that far, right? They filmed this in. I looked up. Remember, I talked about in the prequel. I looked up where they filmed this, and it was a little town in North Carolina. But it's on the western edge of
Milltown.
It's in the western edge of North Carolina, like right on the edge of where the Appalachians would be, I think. So
but I thought,
close.
like, based on other depictions I've seen of Appalachia, I thought it looked pretty good.
Right, yeah. And because it basically is in Appalachia.
If we have any listeners who live in Appalachia, feel free to agree or disagree.
Yeah.
I would like to know.
I think it's generally considered that, or it's generally agreed upon that they're roughly in, and I think it's even mentioned in the book, like the Kentucky-ish area, roughly, kind of, or like the eastern Kentucky type of area. Whereas the movie filmed that District 12 in North Carolina. So they're not that far from each other. So
I liked Prim starting to have like a panic attack as they walk up to the reaping.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good little detail.
Yeah. Yeah, it's especially because we don't get much of... We get a lot of... They had to do a lot of work with Prim. She becomes an important character in the sequels. And... They had to do a fair amount of work with characterizing her because in the book we get Katniss talking about her. Like, she, you know, there's little moments in the book, and even then, I think this would have been helpful. Something about it in the movie, and maybe she does. I can't remember. But in the book, we get little moments of her talking about how Prim, who is doesn't have can't like hunt. She like won't kill anything. She's a very sentimental and like sensitive girl compared to Katniss, who's much, you know, more like sort of practical and doesn't have any problem like hunting or anything like that. But one of the very distinct differences, the other direction, is that Katniss has no stomach for like gore and like medical stuff, and like because her mom was often like kind of like their town's healer basically, and Prim would always help her mom, and was able to do stuff like that, but couldn't go out and shoot a squirrel, like, but could help, you know, sew a guy's leg back together or whatever. And we don't get any of that in this movie, which is interesting how they're gonna do anything, because that becomes part of her character, right? In later, she becomes a more major player, and that characterization of her becomes important later on. Yeah. So I'm interested to see what they do with Prim in the future movies. So Effie Trinket, we mentioned it. I have this in better in the movie. I originally had this in the movie, nailed it, but then I was like, nah.
As did I, but nah. I think you're right. I think Elizabeth Banks really just...
She elevates her. She's just so good. Yeah. She's so good. There's a couple little lines which we'll get to here and they're probably script lines and not Elizabeth Banks lines, but maybe they are. Maybe who knows? She could have improv these.
Maybe she got really into the character.
Yeah, and she worked on movies, like, you know, she comes from the movies where they fucking, you know, with like Paul Rudd in them, where they did a little more like improvisy kind of like, we're doing that kind of like, let's riff and do some lines, you know, at the end of this scene and put the funniest one in the movie. So some of those lines could just be her. I don't know. Yeah. But I just, even apart from the funnier lines that are added, just her entire portrayal is, again, originally in the movie nailed it, because it's just exactly what you imagine. At least to me, it's kind of exactly what I imagined. But then just takes it to another level by just being incredibly funny. Absolutely.
I liked that we get to see the propaganda film in this. It's mentioned.
Is it? I didn't even remember it being mentioned.
They mention like going over a history of Pan Am, and like they do this every year, and she kind of like checks out.
She tones out.
During it, because you know, it's like that film that you watch in school every single year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I do remember that.
I like that we actually get to see it.
Yeah. This is a very little thing that I just only barely noticed, is that after she volunteers, and the peacekeepers, which is what they're called, they're like the security force, they're the cops, are leading her up to the stage. She's already walking up to the stage when they like Effie like calls her up or whatever. She's already kind of walking up to the stage, but the peacekeepers both, and there's a very distinct close up of them both putting their hand on her back. Yeah. And like, not again, she's already going that direction. It seemed, at least that's how it felt like to me. That's what it looked like to me, is that she was already kind of walking that direction. But there was something very intentional about showing that shot of them putting their hand on her back. And I could be wrong, but to me it felt like it was playing into sort of using shorthand for that patronizing action of a man escorting a young woman, using that shorthand for this whole situation a little bit. Do you see what I'm saying?
I know what you mean. I'm familiar with the hand on the back.
Right. Yeah, and just the way that it's done felt very intentional, and little detail, little moment that I think, without people even realizing it, could add a lot of subtextual subtextual just like unease to this whole situation. Just the way the hand is placed on the back. And again, if it hadn't been like a distinct close-up that they cut in for, I wouldn't have even noticed it. But I was like, you're doing this on purpose. You're showing me this for a reason. And I think that's what's going on there. So after Katniss volunteers, she gets up on stage, and there's this big dramatic moment where nobody claps and they salute her and all this stuff. And then Haymitch drunkenly comes out and starts rambling and then falls off the stage.
Yeah, that's what happens in the book.
In the book. And I am glad that the movie cut Haymitch's part there. It's a fun little moment in the book, but to me it really cheapens the drama of this scene. Like and the tension and the how heavy everything is and everything that's just transpired. Having Haymitch at the end of that come out and be like, bah, bah, and like drunkenly fall off the stage and do a pratfall wouldn't have fit tonally at all.
No, I agree. I do kind of wish we had at least seen him there. Because I wish he had been on the stage, Yeah, I like the idea of where in the book they both like kind of know him already, or at least know of him.
Yeah.
Whereas in the movie, it seems like the train is their first ever encounter with him.
Yeah, I feel like they say something in the movie about like, have you seen Haymitch or something? Like, I feel like they do allude to knowing him.
And I think that there's a way that the movie could have done something similar to what happened in the book. Not the exact same thing, because I think you're right, especially about him like falling off the stage. But I think there's a way to do that further adds to the like demoralizing nature of that scene.
Oh, I think what they do, I agree with you completely that it would have been better if he had been in the scene. I think because he's on the stage, like he should come out and sit in one of the, because in the movie, or in the book, he's sitting on the stage with the mayor and stuff. And then at the end of the ceremony, he gets up to say a few words and drunkenly mumbles and then stumbles off the stage. I think what you do is you just have him on stage in the background. And it doesn't even need to be something that's specifically like pointed out to us as an audience. He doesn't need to say a line. I think like a little detail that would be really good and even a better character building moment for him. Have him come out on stage, clearly inebriated, sitting in the seat, and then like when the anthem plays or something, he like doesn't stand up initially, and like somebody like gets him to stand up. You know what I mean? Like just a little moment where somebody like nudges him and he's like, and he like rolls his eyes and stands up. You know what I mean? Just because he's disillusioned with the whole thing, and he also hates the Capitol and that sort of thing. But he's got to go through this rigmarole. I think that would be fine. I think that would be a good way. I think they just wanted a more personal introduction to him where we didn't first see him kind of as a background character. I think is what they were going for. Would just giving it to us on the train. But yeah, I just don't want.
No, but I like the idea that he's part of District 12.
Yes.
As he is in the book. He's like an institution.
Yeah.
If you will.
Yeah, because I do agree that doesn't come across in the movie. That it doesn't. You could assume in the movie that he like lives in the Capitol or something, and then
or on the train,
or on the train. Well, you could assume he lives in the Capitol and just comes out for the reaping or whatever. But he lives in District 12 in like one of the champions' houses. I do like in the movie that the flashback to Peeta giving bread to Katniss when she's starving one time is kind of piecemealed out to us.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
So where initially we get like when she sees Peeta the first time, we get a flash to her remembering seeing him that night where he gave her food, but we don't know what their whole we don't know exactly what transpired there. I like that. I think and I don't know if it works as well in the book form. Like I don't know if how you do that in a book in the same way you would do it in a movie, where you can just give us a brief flash of that moment.
Yeah, I don't know.
You know what I mean? I don't know if it works to like start giving us that backstory in the book and then cut away from it and then cut. I don't know, but I like the movie's version of it.
I just want to say about that, and I should have mentioned this earlier. I don't think that the movie did a particularly good job of portraying what exactly was going on with Katniss.
I absolutely agree. I thought the exact same thing.
Yeah, because she's supposed to be like starving to death, like literally starving to death in that moment when he gives her this bread.
Yeah,
but we just see her like laying there, like she could be tired, she could be sick, she could be drunk. We don't know.
Yeah. I completely agree. I had the same note. I just forgot to write it down because I was like, well, how would you know what's going on with her right now?
You couldn't possibly.
No.
Yeah, he could be giving her that bread to soak up alcohol. Yeah. We don't know.
I have no idea. I completely agree. I thought that was kind of dumb. They just needed more backstory on that.
Yes.
But so we mentioned earlier that they changed that Madge in the book, Madge gives Katniss the pin when she's after the
pin,
reaping.
yeah.
She gives her the Mockingjay pin. And they changed that in the movie to her buying it or whatever, but she gives it to Prim before the reaping, and is like, "Here, this Mockingjay will protect you," or whatever. And then afterwards, after the reaping happens and Katniss volunteers and Prim comes in, Prim gives it back to her, which I like that moment.
Yeah, I do like that. I like that we got that out of that change.
Yeah. For that change, which is an understandable change, the way they did it, I think they executed it pretty well.
I liked the moment of Katniss watching some footage from a previous year in the Hunger Games while she's on the train. I don't know that it measures up to the stuff that she just remembers in the book, but I liked that we at least got a little bit of that in there.
Yeah.
I also liked Elizabeth Banks' line when she stabbed the table, and she's like, "That is mahogany."
Yeah. Yeah, that's not from the book. It's a good line. So I mentioned it earlier, but we talked about how the designers and stuff are the ones who are like pushing this relationship narrative with them. And one of the little details of that is that when they're going out for the big parade, Cinna tells them to hold hands. Mm-hmm. He's like, "Hold hands," and they do. In the movie, it's just Peeta who does it. He just kind of grabs her hand as they're going out. Yeah. And it's not, there's no implication that anybody told him to do it. It's just something he did. I like that change in giving that to Peeta. I could see both ways. I do like the constructed narrative of it from the designer side, but
I like the constructed narrative, I will say. I think there's some messaging going on about storytelling. And I think there's also an interesting component of like who creates the narratives and who's constructing them. And in this particular case, we like the person who's constructing it, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, I agree. No, I agree. I like both. I don't know. I like the overall idea of them building this narrative more and about, again, what that says about storytelling and the power of narrative and that sort of thing. It felt in character to me that Peeta would do that on his own.
Maybe, I agree, yeah.
As opposed to like somebody having to tell him to do it. In the book, President Snow is described as a small, thin man. Mm-hmm. And I really think that in this instance for this character that bigger is better here. And Donald Sutherland, who they cast, we talked about in the prequel, like begged for this role apparently. He's just more imposing because Donald Sutherland is not small or thin.
Yeah, he's a big guy.
He's just like a large man, and I think that he's much more imposing. But I also think Donald Sutherland is perfect for this role because he has such incredible paternal energy that makes him everything feel a little more sadistic and like him. It makes him even more terrifying that he comes your initial impression of him is paternalistic, and you see Father Marsh or whatever from the wasn't he in
from
Little Women?
No, not Little Women. He was in Pride and Prejudice.
Pride and Prejudice.
He's
Bennett.
Mr. Bennett.
Mr. Bennett. Yes, I was. That's right. It's Bob Odenkirk in the most recent Little Women. Anyways, but that's I'm seeing Mr. Bennett, he's this horrifying.
He's a horrifying dictator,
fat, fascistic leader, and it's I like that dichotomy, and I think that if he was like a frail old man, it wouldn't work for me as well. Yeah. I don't think.
I think you really hit the nail on the head with like the paternal energy. I think he's very good at that. And what's interesting to me too about him as an actor is that he's kind of got like a duality of man thing going on with that specifically, because he can have a very warm, positive paternal energy like he does in Pride and Prejudice, but he can also have the flip side of the coin where he has like a toxic negative paternal energy.
But it's always, and it works even better for this because even though he's physically imposing by being large, you would never get the feeling or the fear that he personally is going to like hit somebody. It's not that. It's that he wields the power to destroy your life, but he'll do it while putting a crown on your head and smiling at you and giving you a warm fatherly hug. He'll be having your family murdered, or what, you know what I mean? Like, and I really think that is perfectly encapsulates the character from what little we know of him in the first book. Because he's in the first book less than he's in the first movie.
Yes, yeah.
But and he's not even in the first movie that much. But I do think that it's a perfect casting and an upgrade from the description we get in the book. I like the costumes from the parade in the movie.
Yeah, I thought they were better. The movie describes them as being like a leotard.
The book.
The book describes them as being like a black leotard with the headdress. And I liked that we get like an elaborate like leather costume.
Future costume, yeah. They're kind of, I don't know. I had mixed feelings. They look dumb, but they're supposed to look dumb. Like everything dumb. In the Capitol looks dumb, so that's like the point. Like it's all like over the top and extravagant in a way that borders on absurd and yeah. But they are cool. I like them. So we don't get like the shower and stuff scene in the Capitol building where Katniss is staying, but we do have this little moment that the movie adds. It's not in the book, where her window, I think it's the window, or it's a viewing screen or whatever, and she has a controller and she's flipping through to like different settings, and she ends up, it's like a desert, and then it's like the city and then whatever, and then she ends up on trees that look like the forest from her home, and it's a very little moment, and I like that she lands on the safety of and the comfort of the woods, and it like. This little moment where it hangs on her looking at it longingly is a great little character moment that I thought the movie added.
Yeah, I liked that moment. I was also curious if it's supposed to be like you could flip to all the different districts.
I mean, maybe, yeah. Because
the first one she goes to looked like the Capitol.
Yeah.
Like it was like a city street. And the desert could be like whatever district is the desert.
Yeah, we don't know where all the different districts are yet, at least. I don't know if there's a map in any of the future books or anything like that. I don't think there is, but there might be.
I would assume it's one of the higher up numbered ones since it's closer to the Capitol.
Well, to me, and this may be a discussion for future episodes, because to me the layout doesn't make a ton of sense. I don't know what... So District 12 is like Appalachia.
Right. And the Capitol is on the other side of the Rockies.
The Capitol is, it's in the Rockies, is what is agreed upon in canon. Is that it's like in the Rocky Mountains. Like it might be Denver or something like that.
They'd like tunnel through at least part of
They go
Rockies.
up into the mountains, yeah. And I think it's supposed to be in the mountains. I think it's supposed to be like Denver or something like that.
Interesting.
And so, but to me that I thought was wild because it would imply that the Capitol is more centrally located, and thus there would have to be some districts on the West Coast.
Well, depending on how much of the coast we lost,
that's true.
Though.
Yeah, that is true. If
and we know that District 11 is like agriculture, so that's got to be like the Midwest.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess that's my point. Is that seems like I guess we don't know how much of the East Coast we lost,
right?
Because there was a District 13, which was potentially
beyond
further
District
east
12,
than 12, but 12's so that could be like the East Coast essentially. Like that could have been inland, like East Coast,
right?
Maybe, but I still think it doesn't track. There's still too many. Here's my point. If 11 is the agricultural and is the Midwest, where are the other 10 districts between
I'm
the
almost
Midwest?
Sure, we can find a map
I know.
of this.
Between the Midwest and the Rocky Mountains, that is not that much of a distance. You can drive that in a day and a half or a day or something like that. And so it's wild to me that I don't know where the other districts are. So it's because in my head they were like concentric, but I feel like they must not be. They must be like more regional. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it must be that District like 1 is like just like Washington State or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Yeah, surely there's a map, even if it's not like a canon map. It's probably like a fan made best guess map or something. Anyways, we got to move along. We can't.
We'll find a map at some point.
Yeah, we have many more episodes to discuss the geographical layout of Pan Am.
I liked the moment of Rue hiding up on the ceiling with the knife.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a nice
just set up for
yeah,
her
set up
skills.
for her character and for her skill set, yeah.
Another perfect Effie line that's not in the book is they're talking about
the career tributes.
I don't even remember what about them.
There's something about them, and they're like, well, they don't get any special treatment, though.
Yeah, she goes, they don't get any special treatment, though. And she says, and I don't think they let them have dessert. And you can. Which is such a great line.
It's such a great line, and I love lines like that. I think are what helps elevate her character.
Yeah,
it's just this wildly tone deaf
completely
attempt
oblivious
to make them feel better.
But
bless her heart, she tried. Yeah, bless her heart.
Yeah, and you can. Yeah, it's such a good line, and the delivery is just completely perfect. There's a tiny scene where Haymitch is out in the Capitol. I don't remember what.
He's in a lobby somewhere.
Yeah, he's in a lounge or something, and he's watching some random kids. Well, later this looks like roughly the same place where he's wheeling and dealing to get them gifts or whatever. But in this moment, he's watching a family or whatever, and there's this little kids who have toy swords, and they're stabbing each other and their parents with them and stuff. And it's just a little moment of Haymitch, just seeing him kind of dealing with this weird dichotomy of, I don't even know if dichotomy is the right word, dissonance between
what he knows reality
the reality of the situation of these kids murdering each other in this terribly brutal gladiatorial games, juxtaposed with these little kids having fun with foam swords. It's wild. So we mentioned that President Snow doesn't play a major role in the book, at least in terms of page time. But we get some extra scenes with him in the movie, and I think they're all really good scenes. Specifically, this one is a very good scene where he's talking to Seneca Crane, and he's like, "Why is there a winner? Why do we have a winner, Seneca?" And Seneca's like, "What? What do you mean?" He's like, "Why don't we just round up 24 kids and murder them all if we want to keep them in line? If we want to scare them or be imposing, we could just round up 24 of their kids and murder them all. But why do we have a winner?" And he's like, "Hope." And he goes to this conversation about, this is how we keep them in line. So we, murder them, but also give them hope. Great scene that I think kind of thematically pushes things forward, but also gives us a little bit more building of Snow's character, which we just don't get any of in the book.
I don't think we even hear him talk yet in the book.
No, they see him at the beginning.
And then again
at
the
the
end. Yeah.
And that's it.
We don't interact with him really.
I like that they add fire to her interview dress.
Yes. Spinny fire flame dress was my note.
Yes. In the book, she has a dress that is it's vibe I got.
Crusted with jewels.
Yeah.
And the way the light hits them kind of looks like
fire when she spins, but it makes sense in the movie. There, I was like, no, it just actually shoots out flames. We have fake flames.
Yeah, we know that they can do this fake flame technology, so why not?
Why not? Yeah, I thought that was a good idea. There's after she confronts PETA after the interview, where he confesses his love for her, and she's like, "How dare you do that? Made me look like an idiot.
Look weak."
Yeah. And she in the book, she pushes him. In the movie, she kind of pushes him up against the wall. In the book, she shoves him and he falls through a coffee table.
Yeah.
It's the moment from the beginning of the second Twilight where where she falls through the coffee table and cuts her hand or whatever. But PETA slices up his hand on a vase or something like that. And he has to get his hands bandaged up the day before the Hunger Games starts. Now, I put this in better than movie because I feel like it doesn't matter in the book.
Yeah, it doesn't go anywhere.
It's made a point that she hurt him and it's going to hinder him in the games, but seems
as
fine.
Far as we know, it doesn't hinder him.
And it's and based on what we know of their medicine, they could probably just it's not like he was bleeding to death. He just got a cut on his hand.
Yeah, they probably have a magic salve that they put on it.
Take care of that in 24 hours. He's fine. So
stitches up his hand.
I just thought it was, I don't know. I guess part of that was just to kind of amp up the fire within her character a little bit that she does hurt him. And also she feels bad about it. I just don't think it really went anywhere and didn't really matter. So just having her confront him and like shove him against the wall, it does the same thing.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know.
I liked how the movie portrayed Katniss starting to freak out right before she goes up into the arena.
Yeah.
Where it seems like she kind of starts to have a panic attack.
Yeah. And also the whole time in the build up to that, I mean, she's terrified in the book from the description, but in the movie she's like shaking the whole time, and it's a little subtle thing, but it works really well. That whole scene is great. I have it in the movie nailed it because I think that entire scene is just like spot on. But there is some little details that I really love, including one of her like having a panic attack, but also the way the sound cuts out when the tube shuts. A little detail that can't really get from the book in the same way. And then cuts her off from Cinna. And great scene, great moment.
I also liked once they're in the arena and she's running away from the initial bloodbath, having her and Foxface like bump into each other and just stare at each other in terror for a second before they both run off.
It does give us a little bit for Foxface's character that she's not for direct confrontation. That's not what she's about.
No, it's not her thing.
She spends the rest of the game just running and stealing food from people. So there's a little moment where Katniss climbs the tree to sleep for the first night, and she hears a camera in the tree, and she turns around and looks into it, and that's how we go into the game maker's world. And I liked seeing like that little implication of like these cameras and like everything.
Right. Yeah, I liked that we got to see that because the book never addresses where exactly the cameras are.
No, she knows she's on camera all the time. She's like, we're always on camera, but there's not.
Yeah, but they never. Yeah, it never discusses like, oh, they're hidden in things or they're little like pods that fly around and follow you, or
it's never addressed.
Like that.
So having it be just like they're in the environment all over the place makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but this wasn't quite how I read this in the book. I liked that there was some kind of like force field around the arena, and then there's like it becomes like a giant screen that they can see the pictures of the dead tributes.
It is slightly different in the sense that you don't get the vibe in the book that there's like a dome over them.
Yeah.
Because although I think there is, in fact I know there is based on future books from my memory, but because they are in a contained like environment. Right. I mean, in the book it's described as like a projection in the sky, like a bat signal basically. It's not clear that you would get the vibe that there's like it's being projected on like a dome above them. To me, you would see it more of like a bat signal spotlight kind of thing in the sky. So it's a slight difference. But I guess I see what you're saying, because it does make the world feel a little more...
It feels a little more claustrophobic.
Yes, and it gives you... and it helps build the the Truman Show vibes of the whole thing by having it be like a dome that is over them, as opposed to just like a up in the sky. It makes it very clear, especially in the movie, that this is... they're in like this 30-mile circle or whatever.
A very contained and controlled environment.
Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense to just cut after she gets stung by the tracker jackers and passes out. She just wakes up and she has been treated. Rue has found her and treated her wounds while she was passed out.
Yeah.
There's some intervening stuff in the book that's irrelevant, like just gets to the important part there.
And it makes sense. Because Rue knew that she was going to do that. Yeah, it makes sense that she would just come and find her. And treat her. Yeah. And it also helps a little bit in the sense of like, just kind of Rue was helping her without knowing. Because in the book, like Rue comes up to her, finds her, like she's building a campfire. She's cooking she's cooking rabbits or something. And Rue comes up. And then Katniss talks to her and is like, oh, yeah, hey, do you want to be allies, blah, blah, blah. And then like have a conversation. I think in the movie, just having Rue help her first. Yes.
Essentially.
Yeah. And like understand that about Katniss.
Yeah.
I also liked having Katniss be able to get Rue out of the trap before she's killed.
Yeah.
Is a good small gut wrench of a change.
Yes. Yeah, because especially for book readers.
Yeah.
Because she does in the book. It's to me the vibe I get is that she's in one of those like in Return of the Jedi where they get pulled up into the net and they're like hanging from the ceiling or hanging from a tree or whatever. It's kind of I can't remember if that's exactly what is described in the book or not, but that was like the vibe I got. And maybe not, maybe whatever. But yeah, getting her out of the net, and then it seems like maybe she'll be, and then the guy's behind him and throws the spear.
And then we return to District 11. Well, we don't return because we haven't actually been there yet.
Yes.
But we see District 11 returning Katniss's Three Fingers salute.
Yeah.
And then rioting.
I mentioned this earlier that so I was disappointed they didn't send the bread, but I was okay because I thought this is a much better moment to give us in the movie. To be fair, I don't remember if this is described as having happened at this moment in the future books because we never leave Katniss's perspective in the book,
right? Which
is one of the things that for stuff like this and the stuff with the game makers, it's one of the weaknesses of the book in that regard is that we're only from Katniss's perspective, and so we don't know what's going on in other parts of the world. So I can't recall if this did happen and is described as having happened in later books, and the movie just showed us it happening in real time, or if this was just a movie ad. Either way, I like it a lot. I think it makes a ton of sense. I also think that making it be so it's District 11 that is rioting, which is a predominantly, if not predominantly, has a large population, a black population in it. Both Rue and Thresh are black, and they're described as black in the book.
Yeah,
that
very explicitly
wild to me when I found out that was a thing. Wild. It's like you just didn't read the book apparently because they're literally So large black population, and I thought the movie made a very distinct choice. Again, I don't know if this is addressed in the books later on, but I thought the movie made a very distinct choice that when this riot, after all this rioting takes place, after Rue is killed, and they're burning down buildings and toppling over grain things. And but the way the peacekeepers put this down is by literally they bring in armored vehicles with fire hoses on top of them. And it's very obvious imagery that they're going for here to the civil rights protests of the 60s and the fire hoses used on protesters back then. And so I thought it was just great, and it made a lot of sense, and it all.
And I think it's a continuation too of some of what Suzanne Collins obviously had to say about race in the book, because we know District 11. I mean, we don't see it like we do in the movie, but we know that Rue and Thresh are both black. Yeah. So we can assume it's a large black population based on the sample that we're shown.
Two out of two that we see are black characters.
And we know that is the agricultural district.
Yep.
And they are not allowed to eat the crops.
Nope.
We learn from Rue.
Yep.
Because Katniss is like, oh, you guys must have plenty of food. And Rue's like, we're not allowed to eat any of it.
Yeah.
And specifically the line, if you steal the food, they whip you and make everyone else watch.
Yeah.
With some very clear allusions to American slavery.
Yeah.
And I think we have got a big message there.
Yeah.
Because if something similar were to happen to American society, similar to what happens in this book, if you don't think that's exactly how that would go down, you are a damn fool.
Yep. Yeah, but I also think it's one of those things where this movie this story, the book and the movie is intersectional, but also very clearly, I mean, the whole thing is a class metaphor.
Yes.
The entire thing is a class metaphor, and we'll see where that goes in later books. But from this first book, is just it. I mean, the districts go in descending order of class essentially.
Yeah.
Like the capital is your 1%. Your district 1 are like the richest district apart from the capital.
And then we
go all the way down
there.
The line from there. But I think it's interesting that even within this big class narrative, there is still Suzanne Collins still acknowledges the intersectionality of even within this completely fucking nightmare capitalist system we have going on here, that even within that identity still matters. And the fact that, because Katniss remarks that, like, well, nobody's been whipped in. Like, that's a rule in their district. They have rules about, like, public whipping. So he goes, but nobody's been whipped in public forever. And she goes, maybe it's because the mayor doesn't really, like, she's, you know, but her district is a predominantly white district.
Yeah.
And I think there is still some, you know, that even within this horrifying class disparity that we have between the districts, we also have other disparities that are going on and that they're addressing. We'll see if the story more explicitly addresses any of that stuff later on. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't recall, but
and there's also this interesting tidbit that we're given as Katniss and Rue are talking to each other, that the Capitol doesn't want people from other districts knowing what goes on in the other districts. And I think that's an important part of the message too, is that we need to band together.
Yeah.
Fucking unionize.
And that was the other part that I
message here.
That was the other part that I had that I wanted to mention, and I have it in the movie Nailed It, which is Gale's political rabble rousing, but it makes sense to talk about here. Is because he does in the movie, Gale does shit talk the Capitol a little bit and rabble rouse.
Yeah.
But I do wish that he had mentioned, and this is one of the things of why I thought I had it in the book was better, is that in the book he explicitly goes on to mention that the Hunger Games are specifically, in his opinion, the Hunger Games are specifically designed to keep them all divided by creating this artificial tension between the poor and the slightly less poor. So District 5 or whatever, or District 3, which is more well-to-do and has tributes who can train and want to compete in the Hunger Games, and, you know, District 2 and 1, 2, and 3 or whatever, which are still not part of it. They still have to send tributes. They are still not part of the quote-unquote like ruling class. And Gale has identified and come to the realization that it's obviously the Capitol is doing this so that we can't band together. Like if we're all worried about fighting with each other, and we're angry at, and we hate District 1 because their people always kill our people in the Hunger Games.
District 1 and District 1 feels superior to us.
Yes. Then we're never going to do anything about the fucking Capitol.
Yeah.
Gale talks, you know, he said he has a whole line about it, and it's like,
there it is,
there
kids.
it is, guys. Fucking Gale out here. Fucking Comrade Gale. Yeah. I hope that one iTunes reviewer is listening to this episode.
Man, good thing that person dipped before this.
Yeah. For people who don't follow us on social media who are listening to this, we had a 1-star review, which we have a few of those, and usually it's because I talk too much, which is fair. But we had a 1-star review from somebody who's saying they enjoyed it until we got political. Or something like that.
Got political.
It's like, what?
Until we got political?
Clearly never, like, what episode did you listen to?
What have you been listening to? Because it was not our podcast.
No, not our podcast, yeah. Wild. Oh, boy. I really like that, so they make the big announcement that the rules are changing, and that there can be 2 winners, you know, both champions from one district can win. And that's what happens in the book, but it's in the movie. We have this little scene where we see Haymitch is the person who talked to Seneca and was like, who gave him this idea to make this rule change, which I thought was a cool little change. I like.
Yeah, I liked that the movie like implied that it was his idea to do that.
It's not implied. We see him suggest it to.
I mean, we don't literally hear him say it.
Don't we?
No. We see them talking, but we don't actually hear their dialogue.
Oh, I could have swore that it was very...
I mean, it's obviously what happened, but we don't literally hear him say that.
Yeah. I like that the movie just has Peeta pass out from his injury. Like, he just kind of falls into, you know, like a feverish fugue state from his injury, as opposed to Katniss having to roofie him to go to the feast.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. I mean, like, I get it in the book. It's like Peeta's like, you don't go to the feast. I don't want you to go to the feast. Says the same thing in the movie, but then in the book he goes to the extra length of like, and I'll get up and I'll go out there and I'll yell and scream and stop, and like they'll come and find me if you go. Like it's just this whole thing, and it's like, and it just makes sense in the movie that he's super injured, he's hurt, he just passes out, and while he's asleep she just goes. Like, yeah, okay,
it makes sense,
sure, fine. It would make even more sense in the book because he's even more injured in the book than he is in the movie. Like he's not even barely conscious or like able to string together rational thoughts in the book at this point. The whole thing was dumb. So this is a little change, but after PETA's got his medicine and he's healing and they go out hunting, they split up so that she can go hunt something, and he's collecting berries or whatever. And in the book, she whistles for him and he doesn't respond or whatever, and then she freaks out and goes to try to find him. In the movie, I like that they have the cannon go off.
Yes.
And that's what triggers her to freak out, because she's like, oh shit. And it's the cannon for Foxface. And the cannon does go off in the book, but not until after she finds PETA, I think.
Right.
I like
it makes sense to just clip those together.
Put it together and then make that cannon be the thing that it also it makes her panic make a little more sense. Like, oh my God, somebody died. Like who? Yeah. Again, little change, but makes a ton of sense.
When the dogs get introduced, we already talked about what we liked better about that.
Yeah.
But I did like when they initially hear them, PETA says, "What is that?" And Katniss says, "It's the finale."
Yeah.
I liked that line. And I also liked that by showing the inside of the game control room, which obviously we can't do in the book because we're in Katniss's perspective, but I liked that it allowed the movie to raise some interesting questions about what is actually real inside the arena.
What do you mean?
I feel like, because like we see these dogs materialize out of what looks like computer bits.
Oh yeah. Yeah, to me it definitely, the tech in the movie feels maybe a little more advanced than what, at least from the first book, than the tech in the book. Now they have very advanced medical technology. Right. They have hovercrafts.
Right.
They have lots of advanced technology, but in particular, the way that the stuff in the arena plays out, I never got the vibe that they were like weird computer generated stuff in the ring. It's all like physical stuff,
right? No, and we know it's physical and it's a real place because like they kill and eat animals. Yeah, while they're there, there's real stuff there. But like particularly that specific moment with the dogs where we see them like materialize and they look
I actually didn't notice that they
look like computer like animation, like they look like they materialize like the Matrix at first. But
don't we see that in the control room?
We do, but then we see them materialize in the arena.
Okay, I missed that part then. I must have
been But then they appear to be real.
Well, they have to be real because they are like real. Mauling
they maul them.
Yeah.
So like, how did they do that?
I guess that's what I mean when the technology in the movie, that's way beyond like we have a hovercraft. That's like we can create matter out of
we can create life.
Thin air, yeah. We create life. Yeah. It is a little beyond what
it's a little bit, and like if this were a different,
because in the book they're specifically described as coming out of like the ground. They're like or they go into like a hole in the ground at the end after the,
which makes sense. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Like a gladiator arena, like the way they
herd them in and out of like underground tunnels.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. But specifically what happened in the book made me think like in the movie
sorry
boy made me think like if this were a different kind of futuristic dystopian series, it would like pull back and we would find out that all of the tributes were actually like in a Matrix-esque thing where they were just like plugged into it and they weren't actually experiencing any of this stuff.
Yeah. Or vice versa, the opposite of that, which is Ender's Game, I think, right?
I've never read Ender's Game, so I don't know.
I think it's Ender's Game or something. There's some series or book or whatever where they think they're playing a game, but they're actually murdering people.
Yeah,
I
think that is Ender's Game. Yeah.
So it's like almost like the opposite.
Kind of the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like giving them a little bit more of a fight on top of the cornucopia, but with Kato, not much. It's just
It's a little bit more.
It's a little bit more of a fight. Whatever. I say that I like it. It's kind of not the point. But whatever. But specifically, we both had this note. I do like giving Kato like a breakdown.
Yeah, he has a bit of a snap.
Yeah. And
where he sees the Matrix.
He sees the lines in the code. He sees the code in the walls, and realizes that he's just like a broken cog in this machine that has been chewed up and spit out, and snaps, and is like wants to die and becomes like suicidal. And it's interesting, and we mentioned it earlier that it's sort of the way that makes the most sense for having to do this moment with him, because in the book Katniss kind of realizes this about him, and hear him vocalizing it and realizing it himself, and vocalizing it lets the audience realize that, but also makes it more tragic that he realizes that in this moment, and again turns him from, again, kind of what we talked about way long time ago at the beginning, turns him from this villain character into like this tragic part of the machine that is. It's not individual villains that are the problem. It's this whole fucking system. Yeah. Like, that's the problem. Speaking of Kato, holy shit. His death in the movie is way better. It plays out essentially identically, but over a much reduced time span. In the book, they exact same thing. He shoots him in the hand, falls off the thing, and then gets mauled by the dogs. But in the book, they sit on top of this cornucopia and listen to him slowly get eaten by these dogs for hours?
Yeah.
And first off, I don't understand. These things are huge. They're described as pretty big in the book. Right. I don't understand how it takes them so long to kill him. Or they don't. No. Maybe the game makers specifically stop them from, maybe that's the implication, is that the game makers stop them from killing him. Yeah. They just like hurt him a lot, and then... So eventually he lays down there forever, like moaning, and then eventually crawls out far enough that Katniss can shoot him in the head and kill him. And it makes way more sense in the movie to just push that together. It's
just put him out of his misery.
And that's a moment where I actually think that while I agree, overall the movie sucks the brutality out in a way that I think is undermining the message a little bit. In this moment, I think it's still just as brutal. It's just... It helps the time frame of the story, but it also helps, I think, our characters a little bit more, just having her immediately shoot him. Yeah. Now, in the book, she can't. He's like underneath. They can't get to him to kill him. So like, but still, I don't know. It's kind of this weird, off-putting, like, hours of them listening to him suffer. Right. And again, I think there's a point there. I just don't know if it really is that important of a point. We already got the point.
Yeah, and I think it's also, like, what happens in the movie, I think is true to Katniss's character, because I think she would just immediately... Yeah.
Well, and I think...
go in for the mercy kill.
I think she would have in the book. I think it's, again, I think it's implied that she just can't.
She can't get to him.
Which is, again, I think it's kind of dumb, but whatever. So they have to kill each other because the rule change has been revoked, and so now Peeta and Katniss have to kill each other.
Except that they don't.
Yes, except that they don't. Oh, and I had a note. Did I not have? There's I don't know. I thought I had this in better in the book, but I know I wrote this note down, but it's now gone from my notes, so I'll mention it here because it's about this part. When they tell them they have to kill each other, there's this little moment in the book that I really love that the movie cuts. They say that, and then Peter reaches into his waistband to pull his knife out. Yeah. And Katniss draws her bow and points her arrow at Peeta. And Peeta just is taking the knife up and then throws it into the lake. And she's like, oh shit, and like puts the bow back down. And I really think that's a very good character moment for Katniss in the terms of, like, it's just who she is. Like, because she does operate on a slightly different level than most of the people. Like, she's an incredibly, like, calculating, kind of not cold, but like practical.
She is very practical. She's also, at her core, she's a survivor. Yeah. And she has a lot of trauma, and that does shit to you.
Yeah. Yeah, and she also I got the vibe throughout the book personally that she has trouble understanding other people's emotions and motivations. Like she doesn't particularly grasp other people's emotions in the same way that everybody does. Like there's just distinct times in the book.
At least everybody else in the book.
At least everybody else. Yeah. And because there's distinct moments in the book where she has like she'll like come to a realization about a character, like, and what they were actually thinking, like way after you would think somebody would realize what, or like at a time it takes her thinking through, like, oh, he was just trying to be nice, or like, oh, and so I think that moment of her drawing the arrow on him when she sees him reach for the knife, she's like, oh shit, and she immediately goes into like fight or flight mode. I think just works for her character, and it just deepens that specific type of character that Katniss is, which is a very interesting and unique character. And I was a little disappointed. I was actually very disappointed that the movie cut that, because to me, that's one of those. It's a little thing, but it's one of those moments that if you understand your character, you keep in the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sure, it's a little thing, and maybe people wouldn't get it or whatever. But for people who like, if you get who Katniss is, that moment has to be in the movie, I feel like. But it still works overall, like, and it's still good Katniss, but it's a little thing. But anyway, so they eventually are going to kill themselves because they're like, well, fuck it, we'll just kill each other. And well, they're actually not going to. Katniss has
Romeo and Juliet it.
Well, and it's implied that Katniss is like, this will work. Like she kind of like winks and nods at Peeta and is like, do it, come on. And it's implied not that they're actually. I think they actually would go through it, but probably. But they're banking, at least Katniss is banking on they won't have to go through with it. But there's this little moment in the movie that is not described in the book where, as they're getting ready to kill themselves, Peeta like grabs her ponytail and just touches it. Little thing. I really like it. I feel like it's just one of those things that, like, in that like final moment, like, just I don't know. Something about like the hair is like a very tactile thing, and it's like, and it's also just, I don't know. He did also mention in the book, and maybe it's a reference to the book, he specifically mentions that the moment he fell in love with her when in 5th grade or whatever it was, when they were little kids, he mentioned specifically her hair.
Yes, that was
in the book,
2 braids.
That how she had these 2 braids or whatever. And I thought, again, just the fact that he grabs her braid is like maybe a very specific book detail call out. But either way, even without it being that, I think it still really works.
I liked having President Snow notice that she's wearing the Mockingjay pin when he crowns them. Although I'm not sure that Haymitch and Cinna would have let her take the risk of wearing it during the ceremony.
Yeah.
I think it's a moment that makes sense.
It's a good moment. I do like it. Yeah, I don't know if they would let her wear it. Maybe they would. I don't know.
Yeah. And it's a good visual way to communicate what's going on.
Yeah. So I love the scene, one of the last scenes, which is not in the book at all, is Seneca is led into, the game master for these games is led into a room and locked in the room, and he tries to open a door and it's, like I said, it's locked, and then he walks over and there's only one thing in the room, and it's this pedestal that has this giant ornate glass vase thing on it. And he walks up to it, and the camera slowly pushes over the edge and tilts to look down into it, and it's just this bowl full of the nightlock berries.
Yeah.
So he got a who's the guy who was forced to drink poison? The Greek guy. Is it Aristotle? Socrates? No, one of those. One of those motherfuckers had to drink hemlock. Anyways, I love that scene. I think it's a great. Again, it perfectly helps build the character of the capital, of the system as a whole. That it doesn't matter that even this guy who's ostensibly part of this system and is one of our villains of this movie, you know, essentially is still, you know, murdered by the same system that he is working to enforce.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot going on there. Really like it. So
I was glad that you had that in a section because I didn't know what to do with that scene.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, they made that guy commit suicide. How do I feel about that? Is it in book 2? I don't know. So from my memory, it's implied that they talk about Seneca Crane, the first game master, and he was killed.
for what happened. I don't know if they go into any detail or not. I can't recall. They may specifically describe this scene in the second book. I don't know. But yeah, I love that. And I specifically love that it cuts from his face, his look of realization and just like, oh, fuck, directly to Stanley Tucci's laughing, smiling face at the interview after. Oh, it's so good. That juxtaposition. When his movie does things right, it does them good. It does real good stuff, but just misses some stuff. All right, we got a few things for the movie Nailed It.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
Buttercup the cat. The cat makes an appearance. I couldn't recall if it was in the movie or not. Not really even in the book that much, but they have a cat.
Yes.
So there you go. Buttercup
Love
the cat.
Katniss sneaking under the quote-unquote high-voltage fence to go hunting.
Yeah. So in the end of the book, Katniss swears that she's talking to PETA, I think. She swears that if she wins the games, she'll never have kids.
Yes.
Like she's like, if we get out of this, I'm never fucking having kids.
Yeah.
And now they don't have that conversation in the movie, but they move that line about her never having kids to the very beginning when she's talking to Gale.
Mm-hmm.
She says that to Gale. And I'm surprised that isn't more of a thing in this universe. And they may get into this in future books. I don't remember. That I wouldn't be. It would surprise me if that was not more of a thing that like the Capitol had to deal with it, which is like forcing people to have children. I'm not saying that they would have to, because I could also see it very realistic that regardless, even though this horrible thing is going on, that it's just part of their life now, and people just odds are in our favor. Our kids probably aren't going to be one of the ones who are murdered. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that. I get that. So like I'm not saying that it's impossible that this wouldn't be a prominent like thing, that a lot of people just wouldn't have kids. But I also thought that could be an interesting story element of like passive protest of just people not having kids.
I mean, I don't know if it's addressed in later books, but considering the type of dystopia we have here, I don't think it would be a stretch to say that the Capitol probably makes any kind of birth control difficult to access.
Yes. No, I think that's absolutely very, very likely. And I doubt that's addressed. It might be. Who knows?
Yeah.
It may be. Yeah, because that would seem very likely.
Yeah.
And even if it did exist, they're poor as shit. They can barely eat, let alone get birth control. The tuck in that tail, little duck, that line Katniss has to Prim, it's a very specific line that they had to include or people would be mad.
And then she wears her mom's blue dress and the intricate braided hairstyle.
I thought the whole reaping scene in the courtyard, in the big town square with the giant screens and everything, felt exactly like what I imagined reading the book.
Yeah, and then like all the kids lined up according to age in the town square.
Yeah, I also thought that the Capitol accent, when Effie comes out, she's our first exposure to the Capitol accent, and it's described in the book, and I mean you can compare it to what you heard in the movie, but this is the description from the book. Why do these people speak in such a high pitch? Why do their jaws barely open when they talk? Why do the ends of their sentences go up as if they're asking a question? Odd vowels, clipped words, and always a hiss on the letter S. No wonder it's impossible not to mimic them. So, yeah, I thought the Capitol accent's kind of exactly what I imagine.
Yeah. Of course, the iconic "I volunteer" as tribute.
She says the exact same lines.
Yes. Maybe the most iconic and oft memed scene from this book / movie.
Absolutely. I love that they kept the moment where nobody applauds when Effie's like, you're champion, a volunteer.
Yeah.
And everybody just stares.
Everybody's like, you know what? Fuck you.
Yeah.
And then the 3-finger salute.
Mm-hmm. Katniss dressing down her mom and about like not quote unquote leaving, meaning like mentally leaving, because after her dad died, Katniss had to like take care of the family.
Her mom sank into a very deep depression. Yeah, it's obvious. To us, the reader.
And I will say that I do appreciate that. I don't think the movie is essentially at least it doesn't feel to me like the book or the movie is faulting her mom particularly, or like being like saying she's like weak or bad for having had that like falling into that depression. Katniss is just saying you can't do she's trying to do what she can to make sure it doesn't happen again. She's like,
I think what we get in the book is a very interesting portrayal of it, because I don't think that the narrative faults her mom for that.
But Katniss
I think Katniss does. But at the same time, we understand why Katniss does.
Yeah. Katniss it's understandable all around. I think that's what's really effective about it in the book is that, Katniss is mad at her about it. But we get why Katniss is mad, because she had to become the mom all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And so, like, we get her frustration with it. But you also, it doesn't feel like the book is saying that the mom's bad, like I said, or weak or anything necessarily. It's sympathetic, but also, since it's from Katniss's perspective, we're siding with her. Like,
we understand her frustration with it. And there was one line in particular from Katniss's, like, inner dialogue, in regards to her mom's depression that just killed me.
Yeah.
That was, perhaps it is a sickness, but it's one we can't afford.
Yeah.
Hello, being relatable.
Yeah. No, and that's one of those things where, that line, because it is, we're also in a point in the future where a lot of medicine and stuff, especially in these poor districts, a lot of science and medicine has been sort of forgotten, or like, there aren't trained doctors and psychologists and stuff. I'm sure in the capital there are, but they don't really have that. So she's like, well, they say it's a sickness, but if it is a sickness, we can't afford it. And it's one of those things that, you can't, with what we talked about earlier, it's incredibly expensive to be poor, and it's incredibly, in a situation like this, it's incredibly difficult and impossible to be, to suffer from any sort of mental...
to be poor and ill.
Yeah, ill in any way, let alone,
It's... You have to make judgment calls.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's a very... This movie this book and the movie get to do a very reasonable and practical appraisal of survival in this sort of situation, but it never feels... It's always clearly critiquing the fact that it's necessary, while understanding, like, Katniss is the practical, super practical, making hard decisions for whatever she has to do character, and she's our protagonist, and we like that about her, but it feels in stark contrast to a lot of other stories where that same character that makes those hard decisions is treated. I'm trying to compare it to like some like zombie fiction or something where similar characters can be that make the tough decisions and are like Shane from The Walking Dead in the first couple seasons, who is like, and I think the show itself presents Shane obviously in a very specific light that is not flattering necessarily, but he makes the tough decisions. But there's an audience that watches the character that makes the tough, hard decisions and like glorifies that and sees it as like this aspirational thing. And I think it's aspirational. Like, Katniss's character is aspirational in the sense that she's a good survivor, but it's not. It's the opposite of aspirational in the sense that like the narrative very clearly is telling us that nobody should have to make these decisions. Yeah. Like, nobody should be making these. The fact that she has to make these decisions is what needs to change.
It's not
Other
good.
people don't need to be more like Katniss. Katniss doesn't need to have to make these decisions. Like, that's what the narrative is saying. And sometimes I feel like audiences with stuff like this can miss that. Again, relating back to like The Walking Dead and stuff, where people can... again, I idealize the character who's making this tough decisions without...
So you just see a badass.
Yeah.
Oh, they're a badass.
Yeah. You see a badass without recognizing the bigger picture of what... And I think, like I said, even in stuff like The Walking Dead, I think the point is that...
Yeah.
The author's intent
but I think you're right, is that, audiences can miss that the point is that person shouldn't have to be that badass.
Yeah. And also that it's not necessarily good. Like, it's even within that, like, that's one of the flaws of Katniss is her... I don't say flaw necessarily, but her inability to, or the fact that she does make those super cold decisions at times is one of the things that it also causes a lot of conflict in her life.
Yeah.
Like with PETA and stuff. And I think that while it's the book is both saying that yes, she's a badass who's this super cool, level-headed person, but also that's not necessarily just a cool thing. Like it's there are bad sides of that.
Gale's lines to Katniss when he comes to see her before she leaves, you know how to hunt, and she says animals, and he's like, how different could it be?
Yeah. Haymitch is spot on, in my opinion. Woody Harrelson's portrayal of Haymitch, it could almost go in better in the movie. He's just pretty much exactly what I imagined from Haymitch, basically. And I think we talked about in the prequel, but I can't imagine many other people playing him the way Woody Harrelson does.
I thought they nailed Cinna.
Yeah.
And they got it, like his description when she first meets him is absolutely spot on too.
Yes.
Where he just has like the little bit of gold eyeliner.
Yeah. I would ask another one that I actually I thought I had a note that I would have put in better in the movie, that I think Lenny Kravitz is fantastic in this role. He perfectly captures, he's so cool without even trying. He's just like, and he has this calming demeanor about him that, everything about Cinna is fantastic.
Yeah. Peeta's lines, where he's talking about how his mother said District 12 might finally have a winner, but she wasn't talking about me.
Yeah.
She was talking about you. And I think they moved that line a little bit. I think he says it on the train in the book, but it's a little bit later in the movie, but it is the same line.
Yeah. I thought the movie did a great job capturing the reality TV-ness of the whole thing.
Yes.
Like I said, I think I got a little bit more of the drawn in the book, where I got lost in it a little bit more, but I still think the movie does a pretty good job of capturing the spectacle.
And I thought the movie made a really good use of screens. Yeah. Like showing screens and going through screens and doing these different things with them. Yeah.
Again, kind of breaking that fourth wall, not even a fourth wall, I guess, but breaking to reinforce the artificial constructed nature of the Hunger Games. And of the whole system that they're living in. Peeta's cake decorating skills translating to camo. It's
somehow.
Whatever, it works. The whole evaluation scene, other than them laughing, like, is essentially identical. I will say, like, she shoots the pig apple. I love. This is better in the movie slightly because it's not described like this in the book. When Seneca walks up and they bring in the roast pig, his acting in that moment, he goes, "Hey, who ordered the pig? Oh," and he's like, this guy, and he's like got his arms around, and it's just exactly that kind of douchey character. Yeah. Who's everything about the way he delivers those lines, like, "Who ordered the pig? Oh, you!" Like, oh my god, I just want to punch them all in the face. Yeah, I love it so much. And then the whole thank you for your consideration and a little bow. I will say that I like in the book, she does like some sweet tactical roles and stuff.
Yeah. She also shoots a couple other things. Like she shoots a light. Yeah. And some different things.
Like she's like rolling around shooting different targets and stuff. And I thought that would have been cool to see. But whatever.
I understand truncating it a little bit.
Speaking of characters, Stanley Tucci is Caesar.
Amazing.
Spot on. Yeah. Perfect. His outfit, his hair, everything. The portrayal is just perfect. He does a great job doing that talk show host thing. It's just, it's so good.
Cinna telling Katniss to pretend that she's talking to him during her interview. And then her saying that I told her, Prim, that I would try to win for her. Yeah.
During the interviews, Peeta and Caesar sniffing each other. Yeah. It's a specific thing out of the book that I wrote down because it made me laugh. That was also the moment where I wrote the note about getting drawn in by the whole pageantry. Like that little scene, just it really worked. And I was glad they kept that little detail in the movie.
And then Peeta's dramatic because she came here with me. Yeah. And then they have that conversation on the roof about Peeta wanting to show them that they don't own him, that he still wants to be himself when he dies. A lot of that was like word for word from what I remember. Yeah. It was. Haymitch advising her to avoid the bloodbath, to run, find shelter, find water. When they insert the trackers into their arms. Yeah,
so they can know where they're going.
And I don't know if this becomes important later.
I believe it does.
But they never say that they took that thing out.
I believe that may come back. I think. I could be wrong. So we mentioned about the whole launch tube scene with Cinna and everything, and then we didn't mention this. He specifically puts the pin on her.
Yes, yeah.
On her, and that's alluded to in the movie. Like he holds up. Although I like the movies. Like I actually like that. It could be a better in the movie moment where he it's like shh to her like about the pin. In the book, it's explained that every tribute gets to bring like a token with them into the ring, so like she's allowed to have the pin, and they had to like go through a process of getting it approved because of that she could prove she couldn't use it as a weapon because one of the other tributes tried to bring a ring that turned out to be like a poison dagger ring or whatever. I think getting rid of that's fine, and just having it be like this little moment of rebellion with Cinna of like smuggling the ring in is a better choice. But I like that. The bow and arrows are silver, which is how they're described in the book. And also we talked about in the prequel about getting a prop from the Hunger Games, and boo, not this bow. This bow and arrow is boring. It's dumb.
It's not interesting.
It's a dumb future bow. Like I hate I hate props from future stuff where it's just silver or chrome or
for the sake of being silver.
I don't like it. I mean, the arrows look kind of cool, but the bow looks stupid. I'm not a fan of the bow. So
we
this
could
is
just
not
spray paint a bow.
Yeah, literally could just buy a cheap bow and spray paint it silver. I'm sorry that patron who upgraded. I won't be getting I'm not sorry, but I have to keep looking because I'm not getting the bow from this movie. That's for sure. So when the melee actually starts, it's pretty much spot on to what happens in the book. PETA telling her not to, like, shaking his head at her, and her kind of like hesitating, and then she does end up running in and then grabbing the backpack and getting the knife thrown into it. All that happens exactly the same. The movie makes a very specific choice here to just cut out all the sound and we just get music. Okay. That works. I think it works really well. I like how all of this plays out, and I mentioned that I do think that it works in the sense too of I think it was the Harry Potter episode, one of the Harry Potter episodes, where we talked about in high adrenaline, like I was comparing it to like sports, but any sort of high adrenaline kind of moment, you do kind of block out, the sound just kind of goes away, and you're just acting, and you're not really hearing necessarily. You are hearing things, but you're also not. It's very hard to explain. But I also will say, so I like that. I think it works in this moment. I will say it's also very easy.
Yeah.
It's like, boy, it's one of those decisions that I will make sometimes where I'm like, this will be really cool. And also it'll be a lot easier to do than doing the sound mixing for this giant melee where there's like fucking a million people fighting like everywhere. Like maybe we just cut all the sound out and just have music, and then we won't have to worry about it. It's like we're gonna save so much time.
And all the rest of the sound engineers are like, yes.
Yeah, exactly. I was just like, it's one of those moments where it's just like, boy, it works, and I get it, but also you shaved off a few days of production in there. Well done.
I also thought that scene was where the shaky cam was at its most effective.
I had a note about the shaky cam and being just finding it a little annoying that it was used throughout. Some of the early shots, like during the reaping and stuff, like, and like before the Hunger Games ever start, I felt they overused the close-up handheld. I was actually getting a little, like, not nauseous, but I was finding it a little annoying to watch at times, like in that early part. It kind of, I guess I got used to it or something.
I think they should have made different choices with different filming styles for this.
I think they really could have pulled back and given us a more traditional sort of presentation for the pre-Hunger Games stuff. And then, and they do a little bit, I don't know. There was a little bit too much of it in the first half of the movie, but it does work here.
Strapping herself into the tree to go to sleep. She does that.
Yeah.
Being annoyed with the person who started the fire and then immediately got killed.
Yeah. I will say that when she straps herself into the tree, it makes more sense in the movie because she has like a length of rope. In the book, it's her belt. Which, how big is her belt? I swear it's her belt in the book.
Belt.
But it's a normal...
Because she says like a belt. I thought there was just a belt in the backpack. I
could have swore it was her belt that she pulled off. And I was like, but how did you pull it off and then get it around a tree and yourself? I could be wrong. I may be misremembering that. But in the book, or in the movie, it's like a length of rope. So, yeah. PETA working with the careers and his whole like little pretending to work with the careers at the beginning and being a double agent and whatnot. And then the fire and the fireballs is exactly like she wakes up and there's just a giant wall of flames.
Yeah, giant wall of flames. I'm going to be honest, I don't get the fireballs.
It's just more exciting.
I guess. I just, like, the wall of fire was already working, and wouldn't it be more exciting to have her fight someone? Like, what if she just straight up got toasted by a fireball and then they were like, oops?
I agree, because I do think, like, it's always implied that, like, they prefer them to fight. You know?
And she's, like, one of the people that the audience is most interested in.
Like, where they
so, like, why would you risk immediately
hitting her with
toasting her?
a flaming bowling ball and just killing her? Yeah, because, it almost does kill her. It hits her leg and, like, lights her on fire. Yeah, that would have been rough. That guy would have got fired. The fireball guy would have got fucking launched into the sun or something.
The career tributes do tree her, but they can't shoot her because they're bad at bows and arrows.
Yeah.
Hamish sends some medicine for her burns, and then Rue is in the neighboring tree. Tracker Jacker nest.
After the Tracker Jackers fall and she's running, and then she remembers to go get the bow from Glimmer, I believe it is. In the book, she has to break Glimmer's fingers.
Yeah,
because Glimmer's dead. Like she's been stung 1,000,000 times by the Tracker Jackers, and she has to like break her fingers. And the description of that whole scene is wild. She realizes later that some of what she was seeing in that moment was not real, was hallucinations from the Tracker Jacker venom. But she does have to break Glimmer's fingers. And in the movie, she does grab her fingers and pull them off the bow, and you hear a breaking sound. So I think that's what they were going for, I'm pretty sure, which I thought was a nice little detail to include, because I remember reading that and being like, Jesus Christ.
And PETA telling her to run, and you kind of like can't tell if it's part of her hallucination or not.
Yeah.
They do have the supplies all in a pyramid, and then booby-trapped with the landmines.
Speaking of the landmines, I had this note. I was really disappointed they didn't do it in this one, because I thought it would have made a ton of sense. She mentions in the book that in a previous... She's telling about the landmines.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, in one of the previous games, one of the contestants dropped their token, which was like a baseball or something, and it set off one of the mines, and they got blown up. And I was like, why didn't they just do that in this one?
Yeah.
Because I like have somebody, and it doesn't even have to be the dropping the token thing. At the beginning, they should have had one person try to book it early or something.
Yeah.
Or even slip or whatever. Because then you have the idea of like, well, they would know that they can't do that, whatever. But like maybe somebody trips or who knows. But have somebody get blown up by the mines, because then you establish the mines.
Right.
Without
having to explain it again later.
And you get that moment of just pure, like, what the fuck? Like, because that's a crazy, dramatic, like, horrifying moment. And I think putting that right there at the beginning, I guess my only guess is that they didn't want to ruin the tension build and then the big moment where everybody goes and runs. Like, that's a very dramatic moment. I guess they didn't want to. I still thought they could. I don't know. Anyways, sorry.
Foxface stealing her supplies.
Yes.
From the book.
Yeah. Katniss then blowing up the food, and Cato just snaps the kid from District 3's neck.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so when Rue dies, this is pretty much spot on from the book. You talked about a couple little changes. One of the things that I do like is that they made, in this moment, it's super quiet. Like there's no music, and the sound effects are really subtle. Like he throws the spear and you just barely hear it, and then she shoots the arrow and it doesn't make a lot of noise, and it felt very realistic. Like it felt really grounded and real, and it made it hit even harder, like that moment. But then also I don't know if it's a reference or maybe not, but there's an exact framing where she has Rue laying there with the flowers and everything, and she's like kneeling over her, and we cut to a shot that is identical to the shot where Aragorn is kneeling over Boromir at the end of Fellowship of the Ring. The lighting is very similar in my head. I could be wrong. I'll try to go find still frames of both, and I'll compare them. But I'm pretty sure that may have been a little nod to the Aragorn Boromir scene. Who knows? Maybe not.
Katniss and PETA have to hunker down in a cave and make kissy face at each other.
Yeah.
For a while. Foxface was in the cornucopia.
Yeah, just clever.
So clever.
For the feast. And then the whole feast scene including Foxface hiding in it and then getting the stuff and running right off. When Katniss goes out, Clove tackles her and is like taunting her, and like is gonna sitting there threatening to kill her, and then Thresh shows up and kills Clove.
Yeah.
That all plays out similarly. Again, the book version feels a little more brutal than the movie version. In the movie, we just kind of see Thresh hit her against the cornucopia a couple times.
Yeah.
And she like dies, I guess. Whereas in the book, he caves her skull in with a rock. Which, again, I get not wanting to, I don't know. There's a line there that is very tough to figure out how to do. It's just, I don't know. Feel like the movie didn't quite get to the right side of the line, maybe.
They do try to take back their previous rule change about 2 winners, which causes Katniss to propose double suicide.
Yep. And then I thought this was a little detail that, I mean, the dress is slightly different than I imagined, but after they win the games and they're doing their final interview with Caesar, it's stated in the book, we go through a very detailed description of the outfit that Cinna, the dress that he made for Katniss in this moment. And she's kind of looking at it and trying to figure out, it's very different from everything else she's worn.
It's like a loose, flowy, like more conservative
yellow
kind of. Yeah, and she's got like flat shoes and her hair down with a headband.
Yeah, and she's trying to figure out why this look or whatever, and it's she realizes that it's to make her look more innocent and like this young innocent star-crossed lover, to sell this story so that the Capitol doesn't exact retribution on them. And I thought her dress in the movie followed that. She kind of looks, and I don't know if it's on purpose, but she's wearing this like yellow, almost not ball gown, but like it's almost like they reminded me of like Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, it's
like
got like a lot of like fluffy kind of fabric
and like tulle and stuff, and but it's like very light and yellow, and then he's in like a blue, Peeta's in like a blue suit or something like that. I don't know. Reminded me of Beauty and the Beast. So.
And then Haymitch warning Katniss that the Capitol is upset that she's made them look foolish and forced them to declare 2 winners.
Yes. And that's our big dramatic setup for the future books. All right, it's time for a few odds and ends before we get to the final verdict.
One thing that I thought the movie did well, which I have here because it's not really like a here or there comparison, was using the game commentators to give us information that Katniss just knows.
Yeah.
But we're not privy to in the movie because we're not inside her head.
Yeah.
Like the information about what the tracker jackers are. In the book, we know that because Katniss knows it.
Yeah.
In the movie, they use the commentators.
They cut out to Caesar and Claudius Templesmith or whatever his name is,
explaining what the tracker jackers are.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a good decision to use that.
No,
use something that's already organic within your story.
I also thought it was fun too. As much as I was disappointed by the hallucination sequence, I did like Caesar like. Hallucinated Caesar like strolling through the woods with his umbrella or whatever.
Kind of jarring.
Yeah, that was fun. So we talked about how I don't want the bow and arrow prop from this, but I was thinking what could be a fun prop, because it's like the only other thing I could think of that was kind of cool is the little care packages. Mm-hmm. The little parachute care package, the way it opens, cute. That could be fun.
We could hang it from the ceiling?
Yeah. I thought that would be a fun prop maybe.
I bet we could make that.
Yeah. We make it. Well, I also might be able to, who knows? It's probably hard to find. I always think that. I always like something like that. How many people would actually be interested in buying that? But there's like, I looked at props from Black Sails one time because like actual like screen used props, and I was like, this is a show that nobody talks about. I mean, it was popular, but like nobody talks about it. It's not like trying to buy something from Game of Thrones,
even though it's amazing,
right? It's not like trying to buy something from Game of Thrones. Right. I'm like, maybe this like weird like a Billy Bones shirt from season 3 of Black Sails. $400. Okay, never mind. All right, never mind. So yeah, I imagine if you were going to be able to buy the care package from this, it'd probably be exorbitantly priced.
Yeah. It does seem like, I will say, it seems like a bad idea to have the parachutes beep loudly as they're coming in, but I guess the game makers wouldn't care about that.
Yeah, probably not. I thought the way that this book should have ended, personally, there's like an extra chapter and a half, in my opinion, in this book that should have just been in the next one, maybe, is there's this moment where they're getting prepared to go up to the Caesar interview. And Haymitch has this, or no, not Haymitch. It's not even a Haymitch line, but Haymitch has mentioned to her that the Capitol's mad at her or whatever.
Yeah.
And blah blah blah. And then she has this thought as she's like walking out to the stage. This to me felt like this had to be the original final paragraph, because this feels like, okay, there are questions to be unraveled back home in the peace and quiet of the woods when no one is watching. Not here with every eye upon me. But I won't have the luxury for who knows how long. And right now, the most dangerous part of the Hunger Games is about to begin. And
that's a total ending
right?
line. Yeah.
As her like walking out on stage, like to be confronted by everybody.
Yeah.
To me, I felt like that's where you end it. And then we pick up, I don't know.
I wonder if there was like editing notes, like we need to have a little bit more of like a denouement kind of thing.
And get her back to District 12 so that she can see PETA in the crowd. I don't know. I was like, that's where it should end. And then we deal with all the fallout in the next book.
Absolutely.
Anyways.
I feel like I'm going to have to wait until book 2 to see how I feel about the movie popping back to Gale when Katniss and PETA kiss in the cave. Because there was an implication that he was jealous. But I don't actually know what any of Gale's thoughts and feelings are yet, so I had to withhold judgment on that.
I mean, that is.
I mean, I know that there's a love triangle in this, but I obviously haven't read them all, haven't seen all the movies, so I don't know what is text love triangle and what is popular culture conversation surrounding these love triangle.
I don't remember, so I couldn't tell you.
So
I just know it gets
it's
more
something that I'm really interested to see how I feel about moving forward.
Yeah.
Because the love triangle is a big part of the reason that I did not read these when they came out, because I was so burned by Twilight.
I will say this, my memory is that the love triangle in this plays out in a way that I think a lot of people felt was very unsatisfying. That's my memory, is that a lot of people did not like the way things resolved. And I'm interested to see how I feel. I don't remember how, I truly don't recall what I thought of it. I don't recall what happens. And I don't recall how I felt about it. So I'm interested to see on this reading where my feelings go with how those things move on in the future. But
all right, my last note here. When Katniss has the cut on her head and PETA smears the medicine on it for her, literally all I could hear in my head was Simba.
Yeah.
Because he like takes his thumb.
He does take his thumb and he smears it.
Yeah.
No, I see what you're saying. Absolutely. I absolutely see what you're saying. All right. We just mentioned Katie has not read or seen these stories before. And because of that, Katie gets to predict the Hunger Games series.
It's gonna happen, Edward. I've seen it.
So I've not read them nor seen the movies. I do know a little bit about what happens just from like pop culture osmosis.
Right.
So in the interests of transparency, here is what I already know about Catching Fire.
Okay.
I know that Katniss and PETA end up back in the Hunger Games somehow, but I don't know why.
Okay.
And I know that there is a character with a trident.
Yes.
Who and why, I don't know. Maybe it's a Percy Jackson crossover. One can hope. So here are my predictions for Catching Fire. I did try to keep this a skosh light.
Okay.
So my predictions. 1, Katniss and PETA will have to live in one of the victors' houses together in order to keep up the pretense of their relationship. Things get awkward. Classic fanfic setup.
Interesting.
There's only one bed.
I'm going to do my best not to reveal. Again, I don't recall much, but I'll do my best not to reveal anything I do recall.
Next prediction. Katniss will get depressed from all the PTSD and also from not being able to cross the fence and go into the woods since there's so much attention on her now.
Okay. Yep.
Next prediction. Gale will be super jealous and try to fight Peeta, and Peeta will probably let him win because I feel like that's the type of person Peeta is.
Oh, okay.
Or he might just be like...
Didn't I make a prediction like that in Twilight?
Yeah,
Did I make that prediction?
You had a big prediction about like Mike trying to fight Edward or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, I was like, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Next prediction. Maybe they end up back in the games because the next year's District 12 tributes die somehow. Maybe the train crashes. And it turns out that the rule for that is that the 2 previous victors have to step in.
Interesting.
And my last prediction then is that if that or something similar to that is the case, that Haymitch will probably try to go, but Peeta won't allow him to do it.
Yeah.
And those are my predictions for Catching Fire.
Ooh, I like that last prediction. That's fun. I don't remember. I have a vague idea of why, but I can't be sure, so I won't say anything.
We'll be starting on Catching Fire. I bought us 2 used copies of it through Thrift Books and somehow accidentally purchased 2 large print copies.
Yep.
So we will not have any eye strain while we're reading this.
Fantastic. All right, before we get to the final verdict, we wanted to remind you that you can do us a gigantic favor by heading over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Support us there for $2, $5, or $15 or more a month. And you get access to different things at each level. At $2 a month, you get early access and ad-free, which we don't have ads right now, but if we ever do, you'll get them ad-free. At $5, you get all that stuff from 2, plus at $5, you get all that stuff from 2, plus you get bonus content where we, at least once a month, we record a bonus episode where we talk about some piece of media or something that we've been watching recently. We've done a bunch of movie reviews recently and discussions from some patron requests. We did a recent patron poll where the next few are going to be whatever the movies that we had been wanting to watch, the patrons picked, and we're going to be talking about them. The next one this current month that we'll be doing in the next week or 2 is Parasite. So if you want to hear us discuss Parasite, head over to Patreon and support us for $5 a month there. And at $15 level, you get all that stuff. Plus, you get priority recommendations. So if you support us at $15, you request something, we throw it in the hopper. Right now, we're a ways out, so it's going to be a while. If you sign up, full disclosure, you're going to be 6 months or so before we get to.
We're fully booked out through the end of this year. So.
Yeah, we're fully booked, but you can still do that if you know. And here's the thing: we have people who have requests that are building up. We have patron requests that are building up into next year already. So. A couple, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not a ton, but we do our best to work them in as soon as we can, as quickly as we can. So that's what you get there.
Another thing that I want to mention that we haven't really talked about is that something else that you get at all levels on Patreon.
Oh yeah, I always forget about this.
I announce the next month, like at the end of every month, I announce what the books and movies are for the next month.
Yeah.
So you have that in advance. Yeah. If you want to read along with us, watch along with us, you'll know what we're going to be covering. A
little bit further out than everybody else. So on social media, which is the other thing we wanted to mention, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads. On social media, specifically Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we announce like a week or 2 ahead of time, right? Roughly.
Like a weekish,
roughly ahead of time, what we're going to be doing for the next episode. So you get a head start there. In our summer series, you obviously get a bigger head start because we announced the whole series at the beginning. But you get it like Katie said, like a whole month ahead of time if you support us at any level on Patreon. But on social media, follow us and interact. Mainly thing we like is give us feedback on these episodes. We have polls and we want your comments because we read and discuss them on the prequel episodes. Mm-hmm. So that's another good reason to listen to the prequel episodes. Also, they're good. So. Our learning things segments are great. I'm not saying people listen to the prequel episodes, just not as much as the main episodes. You're missing out. That's all I'm saying. All right. It's time for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first. Verdict afterwards.
So I found this to be a really difficult one to decide. Overall, I think the movie does a fantastic job of capturing most of what makes The Hunger Games, the book, work. The dystopian future setting, the absurd believability of the Hunger Games as a premise, and the performances do a really good job reflecting the characters in the book, and some of them even elevate the characters in the book. There are no major changes here. There are a couple smallish to medium changes, but nothing crazy big. Like
Right,
it is a very faithful adaptation. I think the movie does a few things better than the book, like adding the District 11 riot scene, giving Kato that realization in his final moments, the expansion of Seneca Crane in the Game Maker's roles, and there are some truly elevating performances, specifically from Jennifer Lawrence, Elizabeth Banks, Lenny Kravitz, and Woody Harrelson. To me, those are the four that stand out the most. But I think the film does miss out on a bit of some of the realism and brutality of the book that really helps drive home the depravity of the games. The book does not shy away at all from describing the absolute horrific things that contestants go through and how hopeless it all constantly feels. The movie goes there as much as I think it can with a PG-13 rating, but it doesn't quite get to the gut-wrenching level that I think would have been effective and is really effective in the book. I find Katniss to be a really fascinating character to read, and being in her head and seeing how she thinks is super interesting. I think Jennifer Lawrence did about as good of a job at portraying the Katniss of the book as you could, but I found myself missing the ability to hear her think through situations because I just found it super interesting and her character super compelling. I felt that in both the book and the movie, the social commentary and the thematic messaging started out incredibly strong, then gets lost a little bit during the actual games before picking up again back at the end. I found myself excited to get to the next book and see where things are going because I truly do not remember. Ultimately, I'm going to pick the book, but only by like the smallest of margins. This was a really well-crafted film that made a bunch of really smart small changes that did add to the story, but I think I just missed being in Katniss's head a bit too much to pick it over the book.
I'm not having as much trouble choosing as you are.
Okay.
For me, it was pretty unequivocally the book. I liked the movie, and I thought it was a very good adaptation that both nailed a lot of the material and also made some good changes here and there, as you said. But I think you're right that the movie can't get away with the sheer brutality of the book. And while the social commentary is present in both, I think being in Katniss's head in the book makes it really crystallize. So much of the horror and the brutality of this world is depicted via errant thoughts and observations that we get from her. It's horrific. It's also totally normal to her. And I don't think the movie quite nails that. And that is the primary reason that I'm giving this one to the book.
I agree completely. 100%. 100%. That's it for the first epically long episode. It's 11 o'clock at night, almost. We started recording this after dinner of the first of our summer series. Thank you for sticking around. If you did, we know they're long, but I think they're our most listened to episodes.
Yeah.
So I think people enjoy the.
I think it's a
crippling...
particular type of fan that likes these deep dives.
Yes.
And we're here for you guys.
We're here for you because to be fair, and that's why we only do these 4-hour-long, 3-hour-long episodes for the summer series for these books that are so wildly popular that, people have lots of really strong feelings about them. And I know I like listening to people passionately debate and discuss some of their favorite books and movies in great detail. And we don't want to miss anything. So we go a little longer than normal. But we hope you enjoy that and we hope you appreciate it. Katie, what's next?
Up next, we are starting maybe a new tradition. We'll see how we feel about it after this summer. We are going to each do a birthday pick this summer. So coming up next, we have your birthday pick, which is the book Hatchet.
Yes.
And the movie A Cry in the Wild.
Yes. I'm not worried about this one. The book is very popular, or was very popular. The movie is like non-existent.
Yeah.
I will say this here in case people are still listening. We'll talk about it in the prequel episode. You can watch this movie in whole on YouTube, so that helps. That's one of the reasons I'm okay with doing it, because it's available on YouTube.
And we'll share it out on Facebook and Twitter.
Yes. And it's like the full legal version on YouTube is what it seems like. But anyways, this was one of my favorite books as a kid. I read it dozens of times. It's also a pretty short book, so that'll help.
And I've never read it.
Yeah.
So we're doing this like a Switch episode. You're going to reread, and I'm just going to watch the movie. I'm told this one is a childhood classic, but I did not read it.
Yes.
So.
And we're going to discuss that, why maybe you didn't read it and I did in the prequel episode. So come back in 1 week's time.
We're going to float a theory on that.
We're going to break down some interesting ideas in the next prequel episode about why Katie didn't read Hatchet and I did, and why I didn't read... What is it?
A laundry list of ones from my childhood.
Yeah.
Little House on the Prairie, Island of the Blue Dolphins, Julie of the Wolves.
Yes. So we're going to discuss that on the prequel episode, but I'm hoping people are interested to hear us talk about Hatchet. I have never seen this movie. I knew there was a movie that they did based on it, but I've never seen it. I'm sure I'm not going to like it. I love this book. I read this book, like I said, dozens of times as a kid. It was one of my favorites. So yeah, Hatchet in 2 weeks' time should be fun for my birthday. And then we'll get back to the Catching Fire after that. So until that time, guys, gals, and non-binary pals.
Keep reading books.
Don't you go there? Am I?
Yeah.
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 Okay. Well, you didn't say anything, so I got confused. I thought I'm already in my head about it, and then
I'm sorry.
And then you didn't say anything, so I was like, "What? Do I go?"
I think I got confused too. Keep reading books.
Keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.
And may the odds be heavy.